and false news has become all too common. More alarming, some media outlets publish
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Post-Truth Podcast. I'm Zinni, and also you've got Johnny here, and our special guest, Timothy O'Connell. He is a major in the U.S. Air Force and a first officer at Southwest Airlines. He holds a BS in political science from the U.S. Air Force Academy and an MA in theology from the Liberty University. Tim served as a C-130 pilot in the U.S. Air Force with over 16 months of overseas deployment in Iraq and Afghanistan. He then transitioned to the Arkansas Air National Guard and joined the Southwest Airlines as a professional pilot. Tim is rated as a safety officer and instructor on the C-130 and currently serves as an instructor pilot at the schoolhouse and as a Dallas-based first officer at Southwest Airlines. Tim's a family man, a Reformed Christian, and engages in various hobbies, including cigars, aviation, technology, and podcast listening.
Yeah, you said it better than I could, man.
Does that sum it up?
Yeah, that's it. You got me in a nutshell.
Yeah, the initial bio, you know, that we were looking at, it was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff here. We probably need to shorten this down a little bit. So Ben took his best stab. Zinni took his best stab at kind of, condensing it.
And then I ran it through ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why it sounds so good. That's good.
That's right.
It's really good at saying, hey, take this and turn it into a scripted version. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you actually did use ChatGPT?
I condensed it with little segments, and then I said, hey, turn this where when I say it out loud, it sounds good.
Cool.
So
that's
a useful tool.
I haven't used it yet.
Yeah, we've talked about it a couple times on the podcast. We've got an episode that specifically gets into the kind of AI machine learning.
Cool.
So we went down that hole. It's a rabbit hole you could spend a long time on.
Yeah, as long as they don't replace me in the airplane with ChatGPT, I'm all about
That's
it.
That's unlikely, right? You got to have a pilot.
I feel like flight attendants are more at risk of that.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Can an AI throw peanuts? I'm not sure.
Boston was it robotics?
Yeah,
right?
Boston Dynamics.
Chat GPT plugged into a robot. They can start chucking peanuts and alcohol.
Dude, they are always coming up with robotic hands and stuff like that to try to replace pilots in the cockpit now.
It's crazy.
So I don't know if it'll ever happen. And my number one reason that I don't think it'll ever happen is think about all the sci-fi movies out there.
Yeah,
they're still pilots.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, you've got to have that human touch in case something goes wrong. You know, you need the human to kind of react to situational awareness. That'd be tough.
I think it's instinct. A robot. I mean, especially they can only really be programmed to like look at a pixel and try to analyze its contextual relationship to other things. But like, what's your instinct?
I mean, we obviously already have automated piloting, but it's still being driven by a pilot at a computer. Yeah. Right. I mean,
like RPAs and stuff like that. Yep. And what's interesting is in those countries where they don't have a robust aviation culture, the way they train their people is they train them robotically.
Wow.
They don't have the ability to adapt to evolving circumstances. So one of the reasons that the United States produces some of the best pilots in the world consistently is because we train them up to learn how to be autonomous pilots, to react to more than just a small set of circumstances. Piloting is essentially taking the knowledge and experience you have and then applying it to a new circumstance. So I don't think we'll ever get rid of them. But
I mean, great to have you here. There's so many topics we can cover. And, I think this tech talk reminds me of kind of our early background. We've known each other a long time. And I remember, going to your house one time for, I think it was sort of some semblance of a LAN party.
Oh, man.
And I'd never been to a LAN party. I didn't know what that was. We're talking about in the 90s. And, your house was one of the first LAN houses I knew of. And you had the LAN thing. I think we played Call of Duty. Or
something like that,
Counter-Strike,
probably.
Hey.
Before Call of Duty.
I'm still playing Counter-Strike.
So there was,
around.
It's still around. And then your dad was a pilot, of course, for years. And you guys had a flight simulator software, which I had never seen. And
the little joystick. And
the
like that.
little joystick. Yep. So I guess let's just start with telling. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention, you're the only person I've ever known to, I think, get a perfect score on the ACT.
Oh, it wasn't perfect.
You're 1 point off?
I don't know about that. I mean, I took it like 8 times. That was the only secret.
You learned how to beat the test. Is that what
I wasn't that smart. I just learned how to take the test.
Well, long story short.
The test you have to learn how to take. It's very interesting. People who are not very smart at all can just learn the system.
It's a great well-kept secret.
Yeah, you figured it out.
Well, someone told me,
Yeah, so talking about that, I mean, I felt like growing up, you seem to be one of the smarter friends I had. That's probably not saying. It maybe says less about you and more about the friends we had, but that's that you could have done anything. And so how long, when did you decide you wanted to be a pilot and go into the field? I'm sure your father's influence has something to do with it.
What's funny is you would think that I would have had that master plan the whole time. I got to junior year in high school and didn't know what I wanted to do. I applied everywhere. Tulane, Vanderbilt, University of Arkansas, OBU was probably my front runner. It was where I was really going to go. And then I just happened to ask my dad, hey, where'd you go to college? And I kind of knew. He went to the Air Force Academy, right? Yeah. And he was the first person in his family to go to college. And he said, oh, I went to the Air Force Academy. I said, no, not the military stuff. Where'd you go to college? Yeah. And he looked at me like, dude, that is a college. I had no idea. Yeah. He had really not talked a whole lot about it. And so I applied, and it was a lengthy application process. Sure. I wasn't super sure what I was going to do, and then 9/11 happened. And when that happened, it sealed the deal for me.
Yeah, we were 17, 18 when that happened.
And it was right at the time where I was starting to make decisions. Yeah. And so I think, like a lot of Americans, I was just sort of mad. Yeah. I was like, man. And I also had this feeling that the world was about to change. Yeah. And I knew that I could do something where I'd be involved with what was going on around the world. And I didn't really have any other strong guidelines pushing me towards any one school or another. Yeah. I will say this, to my dad's credit, he never really told me what it was going to be like. It sucked.
Did it?
Oh man.
What do they call basic in the Air Force?
Basic. Yeah.
Oh,
they kind of call it beast, but it's basic cadet training. Yeah. And it's all summer. It was 6 weeks of just awful. Yeah. And that was just the very beginning.
You had to do that before freshman year?
Before you start academics. And
it was see if you could even cut the mustard at that point.
Which,
right?
Fortunately I was able to make it through. But I will tell you, thank goodness he didn't give me a whole lot of read ahead. Because ultimately in going there, I wasn't going there for him. I knew that I wanted to be there for me. I think I had 7 roommates over the 4 years that I was there that left.
And that was a 4-year experience for you?
4-year college.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can leave there, but are you still in the military?
No. Now, if you stay more than 2 years, there's some caveat where I think you owe them some time or some money or something.
You took the king's coin.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But so there's actually there's always a huge exodus from what I remember.
They're going to make you stack bricks
after that second year is done, before you start your third year. There's a bunch of cadets who are like, well, it's been nice. I'm going to take my transfer credits and I'm out of here, and they don't owe them anything. But if you start day 1 of your third year, and maybe this is just the rumor mill, but start day 1 of your third year and they own you. I don't know if it's true.
They got to get ROI on all the time they put into
it. And so normally when you graduate there, the way it works is you own 5 years of active duty service. Now you're a commissioned officer. Yeah. And then if you go through pilot training, you owe them another 10 years upon completion of pilot training, which is exactly, I did a little extra, but that's what I was hooked into.
So did you go in knowing that you wanted to fly the heavies, as they call it, or were you interested in other aspects of the Air Force?
I wasn't sure I was going to get to fly.
Because of corrective lenses, right?
No, believe it or not, it was a heart issue.
I see.
And so we thought that I might have had something called WPW, Wolf Parkinson's White, and it was accessory pathway. They did a bunch of tests. Turns out it was basically just a fast heartbeat. I see. And so they cleared me medically to fly at some point later on. And I was like, wait, you guys gonna let me fly? And they were like, sure. I was like, awesome. So when I went to pilot training, you can imagine you get the room, there's 20, 30 people there, all young guys that are, type A personalities, and they're talking to each other. What are you going to fly? And
the top
fly
gun
fighters.
Guys.
Yeah. I'm going to fly F-22s. I'm going to fly bombers. I'm going to fly C-17s. And I think I was the only person in the room. They were like, what do you want to fly, Tim? I was like, I want to fly C-130s. And there were a lot of people in the room that were like, what's that? I didn't even know. Yeah, and for those people who don't know, the C-130 is this 4-engine propeller cargo plane. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It's not the most glamorous airplane.
It makes
in the
more
Air Force.
possible, really.
That's what I saw a lot of growing up. Because they would go roaring over. I lived on a mountain, so they were even lower than the traditional. And you could just feel it shaking the ground even from a couple thousand.
Well,
if you grow up in Central Arkansas, you see them run their wrecks all the time. Yeah, they're constantly circling and training.
We're all over here, but a lot of people at large, even in the Air Force, were just like, "You want to fly cargo planes? Yeah. What is the matter with you?" And I knew, I was the secret. It was a well-guarded secret in my family, and that was my dad did it for 20 years. Yeah. And when he finished his active duty career, he got a job flying for the simulators, doing training with Lockheed Martin. And we lived right off the back gate. Yeah. And you got to think this prior to 9/11.
Is that Lockheed Martin in Arkansas?
Yeah. Well, they used to run the simulators because they build the airplanes.
Right. Because I know they got a site down in Camden.
They do, yeah. They've got.
I didn't even know that.
Well, they're dealing more with missiles. and things like that.
Yeah, they also like
they have their
rocket.
fingers in lots
They
of
do a
pies,
lot of stuff.
Not that I can speak intelligently.
We may
to
talk about that
but-
later.
But so my dad would call me at nighttime when the Air Force squadrons were supposed to be coming in for simulators, and the people just wouldn't show up because it was night. Who wanted to be there? He'd be like, "Hey, man, you want to come fly?" And I, back then they didn't even check your ID. You could go on base and stuff like that.
Yeah,
you
I
just flash from your ID, and I would drive right up to the door of the building. He'd badge me in. We'd go in there. The gate would come up, and we'd be on full motion in the simulator, just me and my dad flying airplanes. And I didn't know what I was doing.
So it's a whole cockpit you're sitting in.
It's like the size of this room.
Yeah.
Moves around. John's been
Yeah.
in there with me.
Well, we went when we were kids one time.
And when we were kids, yeah.
And a few years ago we did it again. It's pretty cool.
It's
It
a
feels
fun
like-
experience. And
Yeah.
also for me, it was a formative experience. So when my dad had all these friends from that flying community, relationships with other families. And so when I got to pilot training, if they're going to let me fly, there was only one logical conclusion.
Yeah.
I was going to fly Hercs. But what was great about it is that was not considered a highly desirable airframe. So everybody in the room loved me because
I was about to
they're
say,
like, they didn't have to compete with me, right? Like I was
also
getting the
don't know that
sloppy
you'll
seconds
probably
in
live the
their mind.
longest.
Yeah.
What's that?
They also know that you'll probably live the longest.
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know.
C-130 pilot.
I mean, it's
Well, I'm sure the Academy was probably really happy too. It's like, oh, we got one that wants to fly these big planes.
and
right?
ultimately the Academy don't worry about it. They're going to rack and stack you in pilot
I
training.
see.
It's not like 100% of the people who want to fly fighters get to fly fighters.
Yeah.
You got to perform
That
well.
gets culled
and-
down. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so ultimately you may be flying a tanker and you wanted to be a fighter guy. And, that just happens sometimes. I was under no delusions. I wasn't God's gift to aviation. Still not.
Well, you had no competition. So
Not
we
at
really
all.
have no gauge of how good a pilot you were at the time.
I mean, everyone gets an objective score. So I'm happy to say that I was remarkably average.
I'm sure.
And I still am.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that, right?
That's
so it's
awesome.
called the standard.
Yeah.
And I meet it. So
The average it's a high average if you're in the military, right?
I will say this, that
Yeah.
their training is hard. It's legit. And I think it still is. They've pared it down a little bit over the years, but boy, I'll tell you what, it's great training.
Yeah.
And it really carries you forward in your career. It allows you to, survive, honestly. Your training will save your life in many environments.
Yeah. So let's kind of transition through, right? So you're nearing the end, getting close to graduation, active wars going on, like we talked about, you saw lots of combat. So transitioning out of school into your first combat mission, tell us about that. Like, what was that experience like and what was it?
Well, so I started in the old C-130s. These airplanes I flew were built in like 1960, 1961.
Wow.
And you would think that some of the people I was flying with were born before then too. I mean, these guys were crusty, salty.
The old guard.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is exactly what I called it.
Is that
And
right?
so our first deployments weren't exactly fun experiences all the time. I mean, I was brand new. I was pretty much just an idiot, I was learning, but not fast enough.
They throw you in the co-pilot seat?
Always. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
back then we'd sit right seat for years.
Yeah.
It might be 3 or 4 years before you upgraded to what we call aircraft commander.
I see.
And for me, that was exactly what happened. It was paid your dues there and stuff like that, multiple deployments in the right seat. And it was an interesting environment because they still flew and trained and operated the kind of the same vibe that they used to do it in Vietnam. It was just like you had to have tough skin, to make it through there. And I mean, one time I remember like my aircraft commander was a recent weapons school graduate and is just super full of himself. And he said, "I need you to calculate the penetration descent." And I mean, my brain, we're flying an airplane over Iraq and my brain just goes blank. I don't even know what book to look at. And I remember fumbling around for a while. And the next thing I know, he just took his big checklist and just decked me with it.
Oh my God.
I mean, glasses are flying off and stuff like that. And that was just, that was the emo. That's how you flew.
That's when you're coming into a landing type situation, penetration descent.
Yeah, you're going from a high altitude structure where, you're too high up for them to shoot you with an AK-47.
Gotcha.
And then you're gonna make as fast of a descent as you can and go right into a landing.
Yeah.
So, and I should have known how to do it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that hard or complicated.
You just blinked out.
And I was brand new. And so, but that was the environment we started in.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to say that as I went through my career, the environment was way different by the time we were done.
I see.
So
that first deployment,
better a checklist board in your face than getting shot by artillery.
That's
or
true.
anti-air.
I kind of see where he's coming from. Maybe his heart was in the right place. I'm not sure I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but so, and also I learned a lot about what kind of a leader I wanted to be through my career, watching some good examples and then learning from the bad examples. And we had plenty of both. So
what was the oldest, when you were in that spot, like what were the oldest pilots you were flying with? Like, had they seen like Vietnam combat?
No,
any of those?
In our squadrons, so what you'll find typically is, if you get to be about 42 years in the Air Force, let's assume you graduated college and got commissioned around 21, 22. You have a 20-year career window there where after 20 years of active duty service, you can retire with your pension, right? So most people don't hang around much longer than 20 years. If you're going to go up and be like a colonel or a general, then you hang around a few extra years. But those guys typically aren't flying the airplanes with you.
So if you're getting Pentagon or somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and they're no longer line operators at that point. So if you're flying in a deployment with a crew, the guy you're flying with has probably been doing the job somewhere between 5 and 15 years.
I see.
And so now, when I was 22 years old, that guy seemed ancient to me. The funny thing now is that I would be considered way older, right? So I don't feel that old, but I'm now, one of the old guys who's been around, I guess it's been 18 years.
Perspective, I think. So that first deployment, was that Iraqi Freedom then?
Yeah, OEF at that time, and it transitioned shortly thereafter to O&D, New Dawn. So, yeah.
And
what is OEF and OE?
So Operation OIF, right? Iraqi Freedom.
Okay.
And then Operation New Dawn. Why they broke them up into different operations, I have no idea.
Budgetary reasons.
Who knows? Yeah. I mean,
those are two different. Both of those were in Iraq.
Both of those were Iraq, and then we had OEF, Operation Enduring Freedom, in Afghanistan.
Now, in Iraq, were you based there for a year? Were you like, you're going to live at Bagram, or were you? So
Bagram was Afghanistan. We were there for a while. Yeah. In Iraq, we were at Balad.
Okay.
And a lot of our other guys, sister units and stuff like that, would actually be based in Kuwait, but it was like literally a mile across the border from Iraq. So we were constantly, doing shuttles back and forth between the two places. We flew kind of a hub and spoke operation inside of Iraq or Afghanistan later on. And so you'd start from your main base and you'd go out to an out base and deliver and pick up cargo on people, and then come back to your main base, and you just, all the way around.
So you're moving munitions and people and food and everything.
Some of it was, medevac. If you had guys that were injured or attacked or something like that, you'd go in with the C-130, pick them up, get them back to a main staging base. And then your larger jets, like C-17s, would come in and get them to Landstuhl in Germany so that they could get surgeries and stuff like that.
I see.
So we did some medevac. We did a lot of just moving people and equipment around the country. And some of it was really cool, right? Some of it was really anticlimactic. And so we tagged them. We had a pallet of tires, old tires, and we marked the pallet. And I'm not kidding you, man. You just moved the pallet around the country. And you're like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Well, in reality,
to keep you flying every day.
Probably it was probably a sustainment thing, just so that we were there in case they needed us.
Yeah.
It didn't feel good at the time, and then some days you'd be doing missions that were really cool.
Yeah.
We had an air battle staff mission where we'd be drilling holes in the sky, but we were a radio relay for convoys that were getting attacked and stuff like that. And then you felt like you were contributing a little bit more.
I see.
We had some fascinating missions while we were over there, but those were probably the one-offs.
I see.
We had a lot of.
Talk about any of those?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
We took a couple of prisoners. This was in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
A couple of PUC is what we called them, prisoner in control, and they had been rolled up fighting with terrorists a while back, like 5 years past.
Oh wow.
And they had been in custody that entire time. Well, they were Saudi. And so we got to think, well, we say of course, but the Saudi Arabians maintain that they did not support terrorism.
Right.
So it was a huge international thing that we had two confirmed terrorists that were Saudi. They weren't even like funded by the Saudis. They were legit Saudi Arabian citizens.
Wow.
And so we actually repatriated them back to the country. It was the weirdest thing.
That is
when
weird.
they came on the airplane, there was a team of like 10 of the biggest dudes you've ever seen in your life. And they had these hand cannons that looked like something out of Men in Black.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Supposedly they're all aircraft safe weapons, like giant beanbag
So like an
machine guns and stuff like that.
MP4 and, yeah,
Well, I mean,
grenade
just
launchers.
like non-lethal theoretically. I'm sure it'd kill me if they shot me with it. You know,
Oh,
and these
yeah.
guys were no nonsense. They didn't. There wasn't a smile on the crew.
Was that like Delta Force or something?
Who knows? And they're probably Teams guys or
something like that.
yeah. And so then they also had the Air Force had a camera crew that never took the cameras off the prisoners because they had to be able to prove that they didn't mistreat or harm the prisoners.
So was this an exchange at a high level?
Yeah. So when we got to Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, I think, is where we landed.
Yeah.
And I think I could have the name wrong. So and it was a big military base. We were the only moving object on a massive airport.
Wow.
And when we pulled up into parking, there were all these princes and news trucks, like Ninja Turtle news trucks and stuff like that. It was like super weird. We were like, okay, we got to get some gas, but we didn't want to leave the airplane and stuff. It was really strange.
Get the hell out of here.
And then, of course, these guys get off. They have very little possessions with them, and they get off the plane. And the reality is they have kind of like a reintroduction program to get people back introduced into society in Saudi Arabia, but it's also Saudi Arabia. There was a high percentage chance that we were going to see a public execution on the news.
Wow.
Right? So, and we didn't. So who knows what happened to those guys. But it was a really wacky...
That's kind of one of those that gives you goosebumps, right?
It was weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to be on the wrong side of a war. And also it kind of informed my perspective. Like, there's a lot of people out there funding terrorism for various reasons and motivations and stuff like that. So you just you don't want to be naive about who your friends are necessarily.
Yeah.
It's also interesting too, because it's also interesting too, because like, they were Saudi citizens. That doesn't necessarily mean they were employed by the Saudi government.
No, not at all. Yeah.
But from an international standpoint, it's kind of like, obviously they're going to deny that they were on the employee of the Saudi government, right? But also at the same time, it's like these people are just out there doing their thing. If that's what they believe in, they went and fought. It's like, but that also drags their country into it.
Yeah.
And you see it with the ISIS, like a lot of like, I don't know, passionate college students talking about this or that or signing up for it, or like they campaign towards those people. If one of those persons would caught, people would be like, oh, the U.S. is like inside ISIS or something.
Could be. Yeah, we would. I mean, just like the Saudis, I'm sure we would instantly be like, no, that's a small portion, a radical element in our country that doesn't represent our country at large. I'm sure that's what the Saudis
It's interesting, though, that you got to be a part of that sort of espionage diplomacy world.
Yeah, well, I mean,
like that happens.
It was a small part. Really, I was just the operator bringing people from point A to point B, but it was perspective.
So that whole round trip was just a few hours.
Yeah, it was like a 6 or 7 hour flight down there, and likewise on the way back.
You're on the tarmac like 10 minutes to get off as quick as you can.
We probably spent 30, 40 minutes there, maybe a little more. Got to gas up and all that. But and also there's this legal process of exchange of prisoners. Now that part's really fascinating.
Were there some suits there, signing clipboards and things?
Well, I mean, like I said, there's princes and stuff.
Yeah.
So like guys with, I mean, you could tell, and that's what
CIA was there.
None of our guys. It was all just the PR type people in the military with the cameras, combat camera crews is what they call them.
Yeah.
And then I don't remember there
Proof
being
of life.
Probably there was an officer in the Army that was responsible for custody exchange.
Yeah.
And but the interesting thing is we brought them back to the Saudis, but I don't know what we got out of that deal.
Yeah.
Right. So that's something that was brokered at a really high level that I wasn't.
They
I wasn't
put
party
a pallet
to.
onto the plane or
Nothing cool came on the plane, and we didn't want. I mean, you're like the only thing we got in Saudi Arabia was gas.
Yeah, don't put anything on the plane.
And it wasn't like a super friendly thing. They were mad, as hornets that these guys were alive.
Oh wow!
So like to them, this was a huge incident.
They took them off and killed them.
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
I've heard that they have a really strong, robust program in Saudi Arabia for getting guys back integrated in society.
Yeah.
But I also know that, they treat punishment a little differently in that culture than we do in the United States. I mean, you can do some pretty bad stuff in the United States and they're not going to cut off your hand here.
Right.
They still do that there.
They'll do that there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting though. I mean, because of the whole connection to 9/11, obviously all of those pilots were, Saudis, and we're going to talk.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, they were. And that's kind of became a big thing in the commission report, is that they were all Saudis.
Yeah.
So that was an issue.
Definitely interesting things here is like here in the U.S., if you commit crime for somebody on someone's behalf, it's like, yeah, we'll take care of you in prison. Don't worry about it in a couple of years. There, it's like, well, we'll only take one hand. We won't take. I've been able to talk to Dowd. You'll have to take at least one hand for us, but For
sure. So as far as combat goes, I mean, you were in for 15 years nearly, right?
Yeah, I think I did active duty was from beginning of 06 to beginning of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And then since 2019, I've just been doing the schoolhouse thing here. I instruct the upcoming generation on how to fly C-130s.
Yeah. So when you were flying in combat zones, did you have sort of defense escorts that would go with you, aircraft?
Occasionally.
Like,
occasionally.
The C-130 doesn't have a lot in terms of that.
We
right?
have no kinetic weapons at all.
Nothing.
No, we have defensive countermeasures.
That's about it.
That helps.
Yeah.
It's an important part of when you go into a combat zone. And especially knowing that the people that we were engaging against in Iraq and Afghanistan, they weren't near peers. We're not talking about guys with China and Russian kind of military level technology.
Mm-hmm.
They have the hand-me-down weapons that some third party brought them from another benefactor, and they might be left over from the 70s. You know, so that doesn't mean that they can't shoot your airplane down. They can, but they also don't have the training, and they're running and hiding, because if they shoot, the next thing you know, an Apache with a Hellfire missile has got their number. So
like a mile away.
And we did have some times where we go into an area that was a higher threat level, and so we might have an escort. One time, I had a friend that was on the ground in a place called Sparrowhawk, and they got shot at. They were on the ground doing loading and unloading, and they got shot at by an anti-tank missile. And fortunately, the guy who shot the missile messed up, because it didn't eliminate the aircraft. And they were able to get out of there. Well, we had to go in there the next day or following later that day.
Yeah.
And all of us were a little bit like, ooh, you know, I'm not sure I really want to poke that with a stick.
Mm-hmm.
But we had like 4 Apache escorts doing what I call the circle of death. And nobody messed with us, dude. I mean, it was a non-issue. So they had assets out there that could protect your theater tactical airlift guys like us. Most of the time, though, we were going places that were so remote that if there was a threat, it was 1 or 2 guys, right? And then, but really, a lot of time, the threat was the environment we were flying in. It was short runways, dirt landing zones, and Afghanistan, some of the most treacherous weather and terrain in the world. I mean, it's the mountains, southern portion of the Hindu Kush Mountains.
Altitude.
It makes the Rocky Mountains look small.
Wow.
And so when you stop and think, most of the time, our biggest threat, we had real legitimate threats over there.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, even if the bad guys weren't out playing, you know, Mr. Murphy was. And so we were always having to stay. Yeah. You're having to stay on your game because it was a challenging environment to
fly.
I know
you had one particular very short runway nestled in between the mountains there that you've told me about before. I mean, what was that landing like? And did you have to make that multiple times?
We might do it multiple times a day.
Wow.
And so a lot of times our average day in Afghanistan, for example, might be 6 legs, so 6 flights in a day. And you might be going from your main staging base at the Kandahar Bagram and going out to these smaller places, then coming back. Occasionally you'd hop around, but normally you're out and back kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so you might have what we'd call a double shuttle or a triple shuttle, where you'd go the same place, come back, same place, come back, all in one day.
Yeah.
That wasn't uncommon necessarily. And so you'd get familiar with these places, but you could also find yourself getting complacent. You think about if you've done something a million times and you're just kind of on autopilot. I mean, that's an interesting analogy, but mentally you're not engaged. Well, some environmental variable changes, and you're treating it like the last 3 times you went there, except for that now you have a tailwind, or it's a lot warmer. Heat, your temperature affects a ton of what we do.
Yeah.
Or maybe let's say instead of the last couple of times I went in there, I went in empty and picked up some guys and left. This time I'm bringing 30,000 pounds of cargo in. Whoa, we got to be careful, because now we're going to have a lot harder time stopping.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
So you have to really stay on your game and fight complacency, especially if you're there for 6 months.
Yeah.
Like that, boy, by the end of it, you just want to go home.
Was that your term, was 6 months at a time? Or
we had, in Iraq, we had deployments that were typically in the 4 to 5 month range.
Okay.
That was our called AEF rotation. And then Afghanistan, we started with 4-month deployments, but then they actually moved it to 6-month deployments, which tend to stretch towards 7. That was the longest one I did. It was almost 7 full months deployed, and it was just too much. But that being said, I know it's 7 months in country. You have to perspective wise realize that there are Army guys out there that are doing 18-month deployments,
Wow.
and they get 2 weeks of R&R in the middle. That's it. They're gone from their families for a year and a half.
That's wild. Yeah.
So I have nothing to complain about.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick break.
Okay.
We're going to come back and talk a little bit more military stuff,
Cool.
and then transition to commercial.
Awesome. Yeah.
Cool.
Sounds good.
And we're back.
All right. We're back. So I think we want to talk a little bit more about some of your combat before we get into commercial. So I know you had mentioned when we were talking a minute ago, one of your trickiest landing situations in Afghanistan. Tell us about that.
So, and every pilot's going to have a different place that was like their nemesis, right?
Yeah.
For some reason, this place called Kalat was mine. And it was about 5,000 feet altitude. So not the highest field we went to, still high enough that it can mess with you. It was a dirt runway, which means your stopping action is pretty poor. And we often went in there at nighttime. I don't know why, but that was just the way it worked. There was a FOB, a forward operating base, right at the end of the runway. So you could only get in and out of it one way. You weren't allowed to fly over the FOB. Probably wouldn't have worked anyways. And so going in there, one time we had to go around because we didn't see the landing zone in time. At night, you're wearing night vision goggles, and these guys would light the assault zone with like IR chem sticks. And so you kind of knew where it was, but you couldn't find it until you were really close.
Yeah.
And at that point, if you weren't dead on, you were going to go around and have to come back again.
Wow.
And so we had to go around one time out of there. And as we're going around, we follow we had these secret TAC cards that would show us about the operating environment. And we would follow the instructions, be like, hey, if you have to initiate a go around in this particular field, you need to go around to the north, the south, or whatever, right? So we follow the instructions on our TAC cards, what we're going to do. And my co-pilot in the right seat takes the controls, banks it up, and just pulls. And I'm like, what is happening right now? Well, he saw something I didn't see. And it's at nighttime, remember? So really low illumination.
Yeah.
There was what they call an aerostat. And these are giant weather balloon type things. They really don't use them for weather in Afghanistan. They have more like cameras to see terrorists and track incoming mortars and stuff like that. So, but these things are giant balloons that are tethered with steel cables that are probably bigger than your arm.
Something you don't want to hit.
It would rip the wing off your
Yeah.
And he saw it. The aerostat was above us, and he said, man, we got within probably 100, 200 feet of the
cable. Wow.
And so talk about having to clean your shorts out after that. Man. And so then another night we're going into the same place, Kalat. Bad tailwinds. Remember, you can only go in one way, so you have to deal with it. We finally get to the point where we have the landing numbers. We burn some gas, and we can theoretically land in time. I laid acquisition of the zone, and I actually executed the assault landing incorrectly. And I kind of had rested on my training in the sea level environment in Abilene with a lighter gross weight aircraft. Well, we weighed 155,000 pounds, which for the C-130 was pretty heavy. And we had 60 dudes and 2 pallets on the back of the airplane. We were max loaded up with gas too. And so when we landed, it was late acquisition to the same zone, hard to find, high PA, heavy airplane. And the only thing I had going for me at all is the fact they had just recently retrofitted a lot of our airplanes with carbon brakes. And I still think the carbon brakes and the guardian angel that saved my life are the reasons that I'm still walking today.
Wow.
When we landed, I didn't get max anti-skid braking in time. I was in the zone, but I was fast.
Plus you're on dirt.
Yeah. And it's dirt. And procedurally, I should have realized I was just off parameters enough that I needed to go around. But in the moment,
you didn't want to hit the weather balloon. So
well, no, that was later, another day. We yelled at them, they fixed it, blah blah blah. But so in this case, I'm committed to the landing, and I guess you could say I hesitated, and that hesitation of several seconds on the runway before I realized, oh man, I need to be in max reverse and max anti-skid braking. When the dust settled, because it's a dirt runway, so 50 knots ish, the dirt cloud overtook our airplane because we're decelerating. And I see the end of the runway getting closer and closer and closer. And we had a HUD in this airplane. That was the J model by that point. And
heads-up display?
Yeah.
That's where you can see it on the glass in front of you? Or
it's
do you
really
have your
cool.
helmet
So ours is on a flip-down HUD in the C-130J.
That's cool.
Really cool tech.
A lot different than those Vietnam planes you learned.
Yeah.
With,
So,
right?
and which ironically now I went backwards to fly those planes in the guard. But yeah, so back then we had the HUD. And basically when that dirt cloud overtook us, I just stuck a heading in my HUD and rode it with max braking. And I pulled it out of max reverse at about 5 miles an hour. And when the dust clouds settled, we were less than 100 feet away from the end of the runway.
Wow.
And we
Which goes off the edge of a mountain? Or?
No, it's an MRAP, one of those big Army vehicles, is parked at the end of the runway.
Gotcha.
We would have run right into them.
Yeah.
There's no telling what would have happened or who we would have killed. And I'm telling you, it was an hour and 45 minutes to cool our brakes.
Wow.
And we needed every minute of that to clean our shorts out, because it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my career, but it was also human error. Mm-hmm. I went back after that and I talked to the guys in my squadron, briefed the squadron on what I did, because it was like, guys, I nearly killed everybody. Mm-hmm. And it was...
Well, that could happen
Did
any
they
day.
Feel it? Or, I mean, is it only something in the pilot seat that you were aware of?
Absolutely violent. So if you were in the back, it's this shuddering anti-skid, kind of like your car cycles and on a wet road or something like that. I'll only think 3,000 PSI brakes on a big airplane, max reverse, and the whole airplane is just violently stopping.
Wow.
And it smells like your brakes are really, really hot, because they are.
Yeah.
You know, like, we're lucky we didn't blow up a fuse plug in the tires. It's amazing.
What did everyone say after that landing? Or was it just dead silence?
Oh, I will never
die.
forget looking over with this look of like panic and like, oh my gosh, what just nearly happened? And I looked at my co-pilot, who was a really experienced guy, and it was just the ultimate look of betrayal. He was like, "You're supposed to be the guy keeping us safe."
Wow.
And he didn't say that, but you could tell.
You could tell.
And I was just like, oh man, I felt awful. I mean, it was one of those career-defining moments, because it was a mistake I made. It wasn't like someone had shot at me and I had to do some crazy stuff or anything. No, I just messed up procedurally because of negative transfer from the way we had been doing training back in a different environment.
Yeah.
And like I said, complacency will really get you over the long haul in a deployment. We had planes that were lost, that we lost aircrew and planes over there. And so a lot of the time it wasn't, well, all the time that we lost aircraft in Afghanistan for the C-130, it wasn't because they got shot down by the enemy. It was typically crew error combined with environmental circumstances.
I see.
So, and I could have been a statistic.
Yeah.
You know, I was that close.
Wow.
So,
how fast are you typically going when you're hitting the run? Like, by the time you're touching the runway, what's
max effort speeds with a heavy gross weight airplane, you're probably landing around 120. It's pretty slow. You maybe even less than that, depending on your gross weight. So really, when you think about that, 120 miles an hour, for lack of a better way of saying it, like, you know, you've probably gone faster than that in your car. Maybe, you know, so think you've got a really giant airplane that is, you're like, sure. All right, maybe.
Not in my Toyota.
Probably.
Okay, your listeners may have experienced faster speeds on the ground. And here we are flying a giant. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So. A giant airplane landing at really slow speeds. It's an interesting skill set. It's one of the things that makes a C-130.
Well, you're stopping a train, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 120 miles an hour. It's like, so how long was that runway?
5,000 feet.
Okay.
Yeah, I could
used
have
every
numbers
bit of
wrong.
it, basically.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Is that typical, or were those like shorter than?
We had some that were way shorter. And the C-130 can land on a 3,500, legally, easily land on a 3,500 square foot dirt strip. Mm-hmm. And they had some of those in the mountains in Afghanistan. I'm telling you, like, the worst case scenario you could think of for operating an airplane, you know, and landing and taking off. And that was basically Afghanistan. Yeah. And people used to think about, what's the theoretical worst case scenario we could operate in? And it was almost like someone said, well, let's go have a war there. Wow. Because Afghanistan was varsity level. I mean,
that's why it lasted so long, probably one of the reasons.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, you know, it brings us to a discussion about like how long it did last and then how it finished.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, we poured a lot of, obviously, funding and assets into Iraq. We did it again in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, much longer, base of operations, Bagram. And then, you know, how we left there has obviously been controversial. Yep. So, I mean, from your point of view, what do you think when we do something like that, have such a long-term war or multiple long-term wars that don't really have ideal outcomes? I mean, what do you think about all that?
I am by no means the expert on this.
Well, you've been there. I haven't.
And
I don't know.
as far as like the political science and geopolitics and power plays that are involved in how we engage in Iraq and Afghanistan, you will find a wide range of people that think different things. You have some people probably on the more liberal side that are convinced that we did it purely for oil.
or opium.
Could be that.
Sure.
And
Gold.
you will have other people that will say, hey, we were protecting our interests in projecting power and engaging them on their home turf that prevented terrorists from coming here again.
Mm-hmm.
Probably somewhere in between the two is where the truth lies. But even then, who's to say? Because even in the practice of warfare over in Iraq and Afghanistan, I don't think that anyone could say that we got it perfect, right? We spent an unbelievable amount of money in both places. And the question is, what did we get from it? And I don't know the answer. I really don't. I think we secured
that money getting spent towards.
Actually, a lot of it was
contracts,
contractors. Yeah. So, I mean, we had these massive billion-dollar deals for places like KBR and others that
building toilets.
Yeah, porta potties and stuff like that. I mean, it was nothing fancy. And a lot of the infrastructure that we built up there, we left to those countries.
Yeah.
And probably they fell into immediate disrepair. And that's just the way it is. I remember being in Balad in Iraq, and it was an old, massive military base that Saddam Hussein had built up. I mean, it had a theater, a beautiful theater. We would go in with the Army and Air Force guys would go in there and they would show movies while we were deployed. I remember Book of Eli and Avatar came out one year while I was there. And I saw them in Saddam Hussein's giant theater at Balad Air Base.
Yeah.
It was wild.
That is wild.
So we built up these massive bases, and then I shut down a lot of bases in my career. I shut down Balad and I shut down Kandahar. And it was really weird. These were huge places. And then to see them just go into ghost town.
They were basically towns, little towns. So whenever you're shutting down a base, what happens to it?
They do it incrementally and by phase if they do it right. Now, you got to think when we left Afghanistan, finally, they just fled.
Right.
They just up and left.
Well, we all know that was not you could call it a disaster. We saw
I think a lot of people would say
we saw it on TV,
Yeah.
For those against the war, I mean, it left a humanitarian disaster behind.
Humanitarian disaster.
Absolutely.
U.S. citizens
And
there.
A lot of assets.
There were some U.S. citizens, and there were a lot of people we had pledged to help that had helped us at the cost of their lives.
Yeah.
And that we left behind.
Yeah.
So I don't have a lot of peace about that. I mean, there are
Mm-hmm.
people that will say, well, we can't handle the immigrants, whatever. These people will put their lives on the line to support us there. And maybe it's because we paid them, but there had been an implicit or explicit promise that we were going to bring them out of there, and a lot of them got left behind. So that's a tough one to swallow.
It really is. And, aside from the obvious things and people left behind, it also left behind this massive vacuum.
Yeah. Which was immediately filled.
When we were there, did we, in the conflict in Afghanistan, did we engage against Afghani military, or were we strictly engaging against like paramilitary groups and terrorist groups?
Typically, the Afghan military, ANA is what they were called, Afghan Northern Army. These guys, there's also ISAF. I don't even remember the acronym anymore, but that was your regular Army guys from Afghanistan, right? We kind of propped up their government, and then through that, they had their own military. I'm sure that they weren't all good dudes, right? And in a lot of cases, we had the blue on green instance where like people that were part of the ANA or ISAF actually turned around and assassinated the military guys they were working with. That happened on many occasions. And so
it's like the mob of infiltrating the army to keep tabs on joint operations.
Like that, only even shadier. Because you really, how could you vet someone? Yeah. How could you tell the lines, their allegiances? And a lot of them would do it just because they were getting paid to do it. And so they didn't even have any political stake in the game. They're just, it was just who paid them better. Yeah. And so now that, don't get me wrong, I'm not characterizing the overall force there. The overall force there got essentially eliminated when we vacated. And these guys and their families lost their lives.
By the Taliban?
Yeah. Or whoever the operating guys were there. I'm not sure if they even identified as Taliban or ISIS or what at that point. So, it was a really interesting thing. We knew people that flew that, the C-17 that flew out of, I guess it was Kabul. Yeah. When they had people like hanging off the airplane and stuff like that. They were way over max gross weight. They took as many people as they could. And the ramp where that C-17 was, I was like, dude, I have pictures in front of the little Kabul airport sign right where that airplane was. Wow. Standing there. Like I've been there many, many times.
I mean, it was shocking for me to watch. I'm sure for you.
I was in my squadron. We were at Little Rock Air Force Base, just a bunch of guard guys, all of us instructor pilots. So we'd all been there. We have all deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan many times. And we knew, I mean, you can just remember these scenes and environments that you were in. They're etched in your memory. And we're watching the news on CNN or Fox or whatever on TV. And I remember we got some couches in there and every seat in the room was full, all instructor pilots. There's probably 25 or 30 of us in the room. And no one said anything. We're just watching this situation just crumble in Afghanistan. It just felt like, we worked so hard over there to see it, crumble the way it did.
Yeah.
I didn't really have words for it. I still don't. I mean, it was at the end of the day, was there an easy button to get out of Afghanistan? No. Right. Did we have an escape strategy? Like, you don't go buy a house without an escape strategy, right? I mean, like you ought to have a long-term plan. Did we have one? I don't know. I will say this is really interesting. This is just kind of anecdotal history, but it might be really interesting to you guys or to your listeners. When we started, you were asking about who we were fighting over there. There's a movie called 12 Strong, and it's actually pretty close. I'm sure there's a lot of Hollywood involved in it. The Horse Soldiers, you'll hear this talk. And there's a good book about it too. I want to say the book is Horse Soldiers or something like that. So we took some special operators in the beginning of the Afghanistan engagement, and I think it was literally 12 dudes, and they partnered up with a loose coalition of non-terrorist entities, Afghan National Army or whoever it was. Yeah. And they were basically like warlords that supported us. Let's not get us this. And they all hated each other. So, and we, through the help of some airlift and airborne attack assets and these local coalition guys, accomplished, some people said, upwards of 95% of all the measurable objectives that were accomplished in Afghanistan were accomplished in a matter of months at almost zero cost. They did so much in those few months. But there was a turf war, a kind of an existential turf war in the military at that point after they had reached their objective. They pushed the Taliban out of Afghanistan. Yeah. And they eliminated a huge portion of their standing fighting force with 12 guys, a couple of B-52s, and some helicopters, and then the help of the local coalition.
That's amazing.
It was an amazing success.
Yeah, it really is.
And then guess what happened? Big Army and the military-industrial complex and all your contracting entities that had been involved in Iraq got involved. And there was a turf war between your intelligence assets and teams guys and special operators and Big Army.
Trying to get a slice of the pie there, right?
And guess who won?
Yeah.
Big Army.
Yeah.
And so when they
got the
did
backing
that,
of all those contractors and
and how they want, maybe it was a foregone conclusion that was going to happen. I don't know, but I will tell you that at that
goes
point,
back to funding.
Probably. Right? And who knows? I mean, it doesn't take much of a conspiracy theorist to figure out that someone made money off the deal, right?
Sure.
But they built up all these bases. This one I can speak to. If you were flying over Afghanistan at nighttime, with the one notable exception of Kabul, that one city, the rest of the country, if there were lights on, we put them there.
No kidding.
Yeah. And there was one highway, Highway 1, I think is what they called it, that goes around the country, and that was it. And no one used it, because that's where you get blown up. So the reason we existed was to fly around so that people didn't have to run convoys. And so,
did you ever do like tactical drops for those groups deeper in?
We did,
like flyovers and like here's your ATV, your sniper rifle, whatever you need.
Yeah. So we did one of our core competencies in the C-130 is airdrop, and we used to think, well, we're never really going to get to do this in combat. I was wrong about that. We definitely did it. So and they were challenging. They were really sporty because you'd be in the mountain passes. If they couldn't get an airplane to land there, you knew it was bad. Yeah. Like if it was too far away for them to fly the equipment in by a helicopter, you knew you were remote. And if it was so small and treacherous that we couldn't land a C-130 there, because think 3,500 feet, we can land on dirt. Like we can just about land anywhere. It's like, so if we couldn't land there, you knew it was going to be hairy. And it was like giant mountains and you're flying through a mountain pass and turn and run in. And a lot of times what we were dropping was bundles of JP8, the fuel. So it turns out the Army did something really smart a while back. Every piece of equipment in the Army runs off the same gas.
So that is smart.
Yeah. It's the same stuff that we burn in our airplanes.
Yeah.
Really smart. So
jet fuel.
Yeah.
Well, I always heard that about the M1A1. That's jet fuel driven.
So they can put it in their Humvees. They can put it in their generators. And so,
that was a big thing recently with us sending tanks to Ukraine. They were talking about the fighting force have to be trained to use them.
Yeah.
By the way, they run on jet fuel. I mean, all these roadblocks to them actually being used.
Which for us is great because
Yeah.
every piece of equipment in the Army. I mean, I'm probably exaggerating. I'm not an Army guy, but I thought that was a really smart move.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we go out there with, no joke, 18 bundles of this fuel, and it looked like little garbage bags on the top of them. When they come out, they're like lawn darts. I mean,
Wow.
So out of 18 bundles, you guarantee a few of them are just going to just annihilate when they hit the ground.
What kind of height are you flying when you drop stuff?
Pretty
like that?
low on those,
Yeah.
like 600 feet above the ground or something. You'd have to get a little higher in the mountains because you're going to have to climb out of this mountain pass. But yeah, when you would do it, you open the ramp and basically just let them free fall out, and the little guidelines on the side pull the chutes as they're coming out of the airplane, and the center of gravity changes so much as you do it. It's like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, man. You're full forward on the flight yoke, and the airplane's just climbing uncontrollably. And you're like, and then at some point, they're all gone.
And then
you're like, what? So that was pretty fascinating. They had some really cool missions like that over there where you would,
cool.
And you knew you were supporting someone who needed it. We used to tape entire logs of dip and cigarettes and stuff like that, because these Army guys are out in the middle of nowhere
for a year and a half, like you said.
I'll tell you this. The fuel, they were like, nah. They got real excited when they got a big old log of skull or something like that. I mean, we felt bad for them. Of course. We were at least on a big air base, Bagram, and we had a perimeter, and we had these old, buildings. They were kind of like dorms,
Yeah.
But
that's
I had
rations, though. Nicotine is part of that kit. So that
I had a warm bed to sleep in. These guys, I mean, golly, they saw some stuff. So,
So when you're flying at that kind of height, doing drops like that, are you like high alert for RPGs at that point?
Yeah, a lot of our airdrops were nighttime. Almost all of them at that point. And we ran airdrop damage estimates and stuff like that to make sure that, one, we would see, hey, how many times have we done this one run-in? If they're getting used to us coming from this direction, we probably need to mix it up. So we would try to randomize it as much as possible. That's our most vulnerable time for the most part.
Yeah.
Right. That and when you're landing are going to be the most vulnerable points of your flight. So we're really careful about it. And we don't advertise that we're coming.
I'm assuming you don't have like green and red lights flashing on the plane.
No, you're completely blacked out. You're on NVGs. As a matter of fact, we're really careful about like any kind of light discipline in the airplane. So if a bad guy happens to have a pair of NVGs, he's going to have a hard time seeing us coming.
Yeah.
The one downside is we're not moving that fast and we're loud. And so if they got a cell phone, they can call and be like, hey, he's over here. He's coming your way, theoretically. But, I didn't ever have an issue where we took fire during an airdrop. And I think it's because we kind of came in the middle of the night and we were in and out like before you can do it. Yeah. And so that was a smart way of doing business.
And that's one of those things, even if they're going to fire on you, they've got to be a good shot. It's like duck hunting, right?
Yeah.
They didn't have any type of heat seeking.
That'd be well, I mean, they had some. We gave a whole bunch of them to the Afghanis back in the 70s. So you ever see like Charlie Wilson's War?
Leftover from the Cold War. Yeah, sure.
Really cool movie.
Which, by the way, hasn't ended, but that's another
right. Yeah. Well, and so they still had some of the leftover hardware, and probably by proxy, like some of the other countries that were advocating for these, terrorist groups or radical groups, were probably funneling some hardware to them. But our main threat was going to be RPGs and small arms fire.
Yeah, and AKs and things like that.
Typically, that's what they had, And so, again, your biggest threat in Afghanistan in Iraq, a lot of the times was that they just launched mortars at your bases because the huge military installations provided massive targets. They didn't, and they weren't great at targeting.
Yeah,
they had tons of people on the inside. That could kind of tell them, hey, you need to aim here. Everybody's eating at the dining facility right now. And they would set up their stuff and they would have, it's almost like a cartoon when they would light the fuse and, and run away. Like, I think that's kind of how it worked. They would set up the stuff, they'd light it, they'd run, because as soon as any projectile went off, we had local radar systems that would be able to identify where they came from and then hopefully intercept the round on the way in. And sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. We lost people at Bagram Air Base. A good friend of mine, Will, was deployed there. And a mortar attack came in. This one blows my mind. They were doing a fun run on the base in a deployed military environment.
Bizarre.
Everybody was out there in PT gear to go do a 5K.
So what happens when you live there a year and a half?
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know who thought that was.
Well, I
a
mean,
great
you always hear
idea,
of guys who have
but-
Xboxes. And,
Yeah, sure. Well, that's one thing. I mean, you got to do something
you
to pass
gotta
the
have
time and stuff.
something. Yeah.
But they were doing a fun run outside on Bagram Air Base,
Mhm.
and a mortar came in and killed a bunch of people.
Wow.
And my friend was just a few hundred yards away when it happened. And I remember, I mean, we were worried because that was our friends and people over there deployed at that time. I can say, thankfully, that I didn't know anybody who died in that attack. But that kind of thing happened a lot.
Yeah.
They would run vehicle-borne explosive devices into gates.
Mhm.
And we're talking like Oklahoma City bombing level explosions.
Yeah.
And it would kill tons of people. We did a lot of aeromedical evac
Yeah.
for stuff like that.
I heard a lot about
Bring home
that.
some dead soldiers as well.
Yeah, we did some of the HR human remains
Yeah.
trips. Those were always emotionally the hardest by far.
It's emotional to watch or even to
Yeah.
think or talk about. So it's like I can't imagine being the one carrying the bodies home.
You always wanted to pay respect. You know, if you happen to be doing one of those, you didn't just hide up in the flight deck. You want to go down and salute and
Yeah.
get to talk to the people, because a lot of times they're being escorted by their friends. You know what I mean? The guys
Or
that are
family
with
member.
the casket. No, not in the deployed environment. You would just have their buddies who had been fighting with them when they died, and they would be there with the casket.
What
Those
about
guys,
siblings who are both deployed?
that probably happened, but I can't say that I ever encountered that.
Yeah.
So I imagine most of the time they probably separate the siblings. Be my guess, so that they won't both get killed
Mhm.
at the same time. But I
I
don't know.
think, a lot of our generation talk about 9/11 and when we were graduating high school at the time it happened, basically. And, I feel like a lot of our generation was directly impacted because we all knew someone who joined or enlisted or,
Yeah.
I think personally I had 3 or 4 friends who
Stephen Brown.
deployed.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
And, hearing stories about the mortar bombings and things like that. A friend of mine was a Marine at Fallujah. He said it happened all the time.
Yep.
The impact that 9/11 had on our psyches and sort of this need to participate, whatever the case may be. I mean, you're coming from that generation. That's what made you want to pursue this, right? I mean, that's...
Yeah, I mean, I probably was predisposed to it because I had grown up in a military family. So there's no doubt about it that it wasn't like it was a huge, steep learning curve for me to know how to accept authority, to submit to someone that's in authority over me, to follow orders, things like that, because my dad was a military guy. So it just came naturally.
Yeah.
But my motivation to actually participate in that came from feeling like I wanted to do something. I felt probably like a lot of Americans, I felt helpless, like, hey, this is not okay.
Mhm.
And I wish that I could contribute in some meaningful way. In the hindsight, do I think that I did? I hope I did. Right. I mean, you have when you finally join and serve and stuff like that, you realize you were such a small part in the bigger picture. And we're talking about these, huge international events. And I was just the smallest little part in the cog.
Well, even if you're just dropping Skull and Budweiser to the infantry.
No beer. General Order 1, no beer, no drugs. So,
of course, you made an impact.
Yeah.
And so over the lifespan of your combat, how long were you there in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and how many times were you deployed and things like that?
We did, like I said, I think we totaled it up as somewhere between 16 and 18 total months of deployments.
Mhm.
And we saw some of the other times that we would go over that didn't count as a deployment because we were maybe operating out of Europe, and then we would go down for day trips to bring cargo down to like Kuwait or something like
I
that.
see.
But the better part of a year and a half total time, and those add up over time. One of those deployments, a few months, was when I was engaged to get married.
Okay.
And so right off early on in our relationship, my wife, MP, started getting really familiar with what it was like for me to be gone for long chunks of time. And then the next one happened right after we were married, about 6 months after we were married. And then again throughout, but all of my deployments were before we had kids.
I see.
It just so happened, we kind of waited, for that reason.
Did your sort of, forming a family and things like that, did that impact your decision to retire and move on?
Yeah, big time. So we got to the point where there was a period in my career, at the very end of my career, where they had a lot of these what we call non-voluntary deployments coming down on people that were kind of senior. And if we wanted to stay in the military and get to our active duty retirement, they were really going to make you work for it.
Mm.
And one of the deals came down. It was a program called AFPAC Hands. State Department was running really thin. And so someone had a bright idea that they were going to get military guys to go in and do State Department work. So you would run up armored convoys, and you'd work on water, sewage systems,
humanitarian things,
State Department stuff, building nation building.
Sure.
And so you would work with their police.
Abroad?
This is in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and primarily in Afghanistan. And so I got tagged to do it.
Is your mic on?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got tagged to go and be a part of that. Well, the bad thing is it was a year of deployments, consecutive year. You'd come back and do a little time at the Pentagon. You'd go back for another year of deployments. And that was the worst deal imaginable on the table for active duty Air Force pilots at the time. And I just happened to be like tribute for the Air Base that year.
Yeah.
And it was probably a little more complicated than that. But at the end of the day, my name went up and I almost had to go. And they found a volunteer. I still don't know who the guy is, but if I ever find out who volunteered for that program and took my spot, he will never buy beer again. All right. And they had guys in that program that got assassinated by the people they were working with. Yeah. So I didn't end up having to do that, but it was towards the end of my active duty time, and that sealed the deal. We were running scared. We were man, this is the worst possible imaginable thing. And I had 2 kids at that point.
Yeah.
Right? So when that came down, we made the conscious decision that said, okay, it's time for us to transition out of active duty. It seems like my name's on a list. I'm not going to press twice, Yeah. So we finished up a great assignment. My last assignment was really cool. It'd be fun to talk about that one. But I knew at that point, when I went from being, I'm going to do 20 years active duty, no problem, just like my dad did, to there is no way in heaven I'm staying in longer than I have.
These last 5 years would suck really bad, right?
Yeah. And we knew that they were just going to probably be deploying me relatively nonstop.
You remembered that runway you almost ran off the end of, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a lot of things that I was like, you know what, maybe my time here is limited. And I was okay with that. So, you're still serving in the total force when you're a guard guy. So you're still contributing, but it is now for me, it's very part-time, which I'm totally fine with.
Yeah.
And some other guys are going to make a different decision for their family. I like to say every family's calculus is different. And so what was right for me and MP and for our kids is not at all necessarily going to be the same going forward solution for every military family out there. And I have a ton of respect for the guys who stuck it out. And hopefully it wasn't too painful. Right? Yeah. That's my hope.
Yeah. So what was that final mission before you moved on?
So my final assignment was really cool. They had announced a few years prior, hey, we're going to do what they call a block upgrade to the C-130J. And the J model is the new fancy one, right?
With the heads-up
6-bladed props. It's got the heads-up displays, fully automated digital engine controls. I mean, really robust, like avionics.
So you went from a Model T to a Corvette, kind of?
Yeah, no, it really did.
Yeah.
When I went from the E model to the J model, it was like stepping into the Starship Enterprise, man.
Wow.
It was crazy. I loved it. You know me, I'm a huge tech geek. I mean, like early adopter for technology. I love this stuff. And so I was going from steam gauges that were airplanes produced literally in the beginning of Vietnam to something that was a modern airplane. Glass cockpit.
It's amazing.
Oh, and by the way, the J model doesn't have a flight engineer and a navigator. All the systems are automated. And so you're just 2 pilots with full control over everything you're doing. It's really cool. I really enjoyed that plane.
Yeah.
Well, what was neat is they had announced they were going to do what they call block upgrade. So they were going to take an already modern aircraft and they were going to add modernization to it. And so it was really cool. They decided, hey, we're going to add civilian GPS suites and allow you to do all sorts of cool GPS approaches and data link kind of stuff. So integrate into the larger forces data link, kind of sci-fi sort of stuff.
That's pretty wild. Yeah.
It was neat.
Modern warfare.
I got to be the head guy from our command, Air Education Training Command, that sort of ran the team. And they gave me a building, an almost unlimited budget for what we needed.
Yeah.
And they gave us, we had counterparts on the mobility command side. There was probably a grand total of like maybe 10 qualified pilots on this program. And we had 2 airplanes, prototype airplanes that they built from Lockheed. That's awesome. They brought us all down to Marietta, Georgia at the Lockheed plant. And I got to learn from the greats, the engineers who designed and originally flew the new airplane. They taught us everything. It was so cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
I was just like sitting there like, oh my gosh, I wish I could record this, So, and we got to write all the courseware, design the syllabi and
That's
stuff
amazing.
like that. It was a great assignment. What was really cool about it, though, is me and one of my best friends, his name's Seth, and a couple of great dudes that were our loadmaster SMEs in this one room, one building, and it was like a Google idea factory. Anything we wanted to do, there really wasn't a lot of anything to inhibit us from doing it. If it was something that would allow us to produce a better product for the community, we didn't have to like go ask for permission, which is really rare in the Air Force.
Yeah.
Like the Air Force,
any form of military, right?
Oh, I mean, the Air Force especially is the worst. Like they if it's written down in the regulations, you can do it exactly how it's written. If it's not written, you probably shouldn't do it. I've learned this. So, in this case, it was like they were just like, hey, you guys go do your own thing, be safe, and we need you to make this work, and then we need to make it trainable. And they've already retrofitted most of the fleet now for this new block upgrade. So it was a successful program.
Well, you had a pretty big impact then on the
I
future.
loved it. It was so much fun. We got to do all sorts of wacky stuff.
Yeah.
And we put it through every theoretical operating environment that it was going to fly in. And now in the last couple of years, they've already actually started deploying in those airplanes.
That's awesome.
So you're essentially the military man with the know-how who's saying, we've got a plane, but you come see what like changes a pilot would actually want to make to it.
Yeah, so we got to interface with the manufacturer, and we put in a volume of requests for changes. And of course, the money only reached so far, so they didn't make all the changes.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be guys that
they
are
didn't put the ice maker in the cockpit.
Yeah, coffee maker. I wish.
Yeah.
So actually, we had a coffee maker, but there you go. But so yeah, it was really cool in that we got a chance to go put the airplane through its paces.
Yeah.
And we got to basically write the books for the Air Force on how we're going to train it and use it. Now they're going to fine tune that over the years, but we got the first hack at it, which was really fun. Yeah, it was.
How large was that team?
How what?
How many like pilots were on the team? I
think total it was just me and Seth at the time. Okay. We added another one halfway through the program, so 3 of us, and then
so you were the guy pretty much.
Well, I mean, I was in my command. I was me and Seth was by far the smarter character here. I was kind of helping guide the team.
Yeah.
He's a freaking brilliant dude.
Gotcha.
And so, I mean, like doctorate level stuff. And from mobility command, thank goodness we had those guys, because everyone would pick a topic that they would become an expert in.
I was about to say, you've got multiple mindsets.
Oh, it was great.
Tackling this.
I mean, I was a figurehead, and I knew how to fly the airplane, but these guys were the experts. But it was just cool to be involved in it.
Absolutely. Did you know at that point that you were going to move into commercial flying? Because I would imagine that this type of technology experience would prepare you for the cockpit.
It certainly softened the transition.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I knew I was going to try to be getting out of active duty. And at that point, the foregone conclusion for a military pilot is probably commercial flight, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be, we call Part 121, scheduled flying with an airline. And at that time, it was just a dream. Like, I really wanted to work for Southwest.
Yeah.
Thought about FedEx.
Yeah.
I applied everywhere, but there was a position, a moment of time where I already had set my separation date from the Air Force, and I didn't have a job. I had lined up a part-time job with my guard unit, thank goodness.
Yeah.
So I had
Which
somewhere.
You still have.
Yeah, that's where I am now.
Yeah.
And I'm really thankful for that. It was a huge thing to have something to go to, right?
Yeah.
I wasn't going to be unemployed, which was great. I mean, because you stare at I got a paycheck on the 1st and the 15th of the month from 2002 until January 1st of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is a huge difference to go out there and all of a sudden you're kind of in the choose your own adventure.
What am I going to do now?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And when I had wife and kids, and I was just like, oh man. So I remember sitting down with a really wise dude. He was my uncle kind of. And he had been an airline pilot for a while. And I said, man, I'm stressing. And he said, listen, in 4 months, you're going to have job offers from your 2 top choices. And I looked at him and said, there's no way. I haven't heard crickets.
Is that because there's a shortage of pilots?
Yep. And he just knew that he'd been doing it for 25 years. He knew the ebb and flow, and he knew how to read the landscape. I'll be doggone if he wasn't 100% right. Within 4 months, I had job offers from my top 2.
That's awesome.
And so I ended up going to Southwest, which I'm really glad I did.
So now you're still training combat pilots, right?
Yes.
Preparing them for deployments and things like that.
Yep.
And then you're also flying commercial.
Yeah.
So let's take a quick break.
Yeah.
We'll come back and talk about that.
Yeah.
What you're doing now, and get into that.
Cool. Yeah.
Right on.
Alrighty, and we're back. So definitely we've covered your military tours. We've deviated into different technology stuff. One thing we did kind of brush earlier is the impact of 9/11, and so I did want to pose a question of like, I guess, where were you when it happened?
Yeah.
Myself personally, I was 4 years old at the time. I think we had just started homeschooling, and it was, I don't even remember what day of the week it was, because obviously I was 4 years old. I think it was a Tuesday.
Yeah.
my mom is usually up doing stuff, ironing, watching TV, watching Friends or something in the morning. And she comes and wakes up. She's like, I think y'all need to come in here and sit on the couch and watch something. And I was just like, what is going on? So we sit down on this TV, and it's one of those box TVs, real low quality, and just watching. And the first plane had already hit. So we're watching a smoking building. People are already talking about it. And then while we're sitting there, Mom goes, oh my gosh, there's a second plane. Like, you saw it. And it goes boom. And so it was very, I guess, formative. And I didn't think about it much until my later years. I didn't really know what was going on. But at the same time,
you still remember it?
Yeah, it was the first. It's one of the earliest memories that I have.
Wow,
that was like, I didn't even understand the importance, but it felt like I got sucked into gravity for a sec.
That's a great way to describe it.
What was? I mean, y'all were in school at the time, so what was y'all's kind of experience?
I was actually in a college algebra class at a technical college because I was a senior in high school. But I was sort of an elective, homeschooling at that point, had moved on from really typical high school. So I was in college algebra that morning. And so it all happened, or not all of it. A lot of it happened while I was in class. And then when I get out of class, and the student center is sort of at the hub of all these rooms, and it's just packed and everybody's staring at the TVs.
Wow.
So I got there just in time, regrettably, I guess, to see the second plane hit. But yeah,
wow.
That's where I was.
I was in school that day, and then I'm ironically in math class.
Really?
I was a senior, like you. I think we were doing AP statistics, but I remember we didn't do any schoolwork, and we were in there. We were watching. The schools used to have these TVs in the corners, and they were on like some kind of closed network, but you could pull up the news.
Sure.
And they had it streaming on all the TVs. And I remember thinking, as two airplanes hit buildings, I was thinking we were under attack.
Yeah.
Right? Like there was going to be a lot more. I wasn't far off from the truth when you stop and think about it.
That's
there
right.
were 4 airplanes hijacked.
That's right.
And so, but we were thinking that we were going to start seeing reports from Atlanta and LA, Chicago. Well, that never happened. This was all centralized and isolated there.
Yeah.
But when it happened, it was almost like instantly, you kind of mentioned, like I went from not sure what I was going to do with my life to being pretty sure that this was going to be a controlling factor in my career. And I kind of decided, okay.
The siren call. And
this was the time where I would already applied to the Air Force Academy as far as just because I wanted options. Yeah. And I didn't receive my commission, right, or the appointment to the academy until way later. But I went from being like, if I don't get it, I don't get it, to anything I could do to get there, right?
Did you call them up and be like, hey?
Yeah, it doesn't really work like that. But
I really.
But you made sure your T's were crossed, that you had done all of your application stuff, talk with the senators and congressmen, because you had to get appointments and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Well, just to reiterate, I mean, there was this incredible sense of war and dread because I had already turned 18, so I had already sent in my selective service card, the draft, and several others had too, which is something you have to do when you turn 18. And so I remember, initial conversations the next day amongst all my friends were like, "Oh my God,
what if they draft?
Yeah, we're going to get drafted." I mean, it was like, although several enlisted anyway, but I mean, we kind of all knew what was going to happen.
And they never drafted, right?
They did not.
I mean, so they did some stop loss stuff later on, but they never drafted. And at the end of the day, we just had enough people that wanted to participate that we didn't have to go ask or demand from the country at large. Yeah. Which I don't think that there was ever going to be an appetite for something like that in our country. Even with 9/11 happening, I don't think there was ever, in hindsight, going to be a draft.
Vietnam kind of killed that idea.
I really believe that I don't know that we'll ever see, unless we're in a conventional sense attacked on our home front, which would be pretty unrealistic, I suspect. I don't think you'll see a draft in the United States.
I don't think we will either, considering the massive impact the Vietnam draft had. Yeah. I mean, my dad was drafted. My uncle was drafted. Yeah. My uncle was killed there.
Yeah. I did not know that. Huh.
Yeah. And so I think that a lot of families felt the residual impact of that.
The only downside is that Americans have remarkably short memories.
That's true.
And so like when you think about other cultures at large, they remember what happened to them and what they've gone through. And they go back hundreds or thousands of years. Think like the Israelis, right?
Yeah.
Like they have a long memory. And they execute on it.
Yeah, no doubt.
But the United States, we don't. And so we will find, like, for instance, right now, we're culturally, there's a huge push, especially at universities, that kind of endorses socialism and communism. But you got to think, like, it wasn't very long ago. My dad was what they consider to be a Cold Warrior.
Right.
They have hats,
Yeah.
say Vietnam War, Korean War, World War II, and they say Cold War.
Yeah.
Like, these guys fought, their entire career
against that,
was
all that.
defined by the fight against communism. And so we do have short memories. It is possible, but I think that one will always be distasteful for our country at large. I don't think we'll have a draft.
So when you're talking, enlistment now is the way to go. And so you're training a lot of these new recruits, right?
And to clarify, I will always make a recommendation if a kid's got the grades or has the ability to do it. It is, if you're willing to be a leader, it's always great to be commissioned as an officer. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with the enlisted side. That's a very noble thing to do as well. But one of them, they're different. They're distinct, right? Yeah. And so you need both. So I deal exclusively with officers because in order to be a pilot in the Air Force, you have to be an officer.
So the career path, your military career path has not ended. You retired from active, but now you've got kind of a two-pronged life, right?
Yeah.
You train in the simulators and in actual flights, and then you commercially fly for Southwest. So I don't know. I was just going to have you transition to talk about that. Did you have anything else to ask before?
So obviously, before we transition, around 9/11, you've got a really unified country. Everybody put, U.S. flags in their yard. Yeah. Obviously, you had a really passionate military force, people signing up, people already signed up, getting ready to gear up. How long did that last, that kind of fire of like, we're doing this for 9/11? Once you all were over there, like 5-6 years in, it's not the same.
I think that the thing that put a real damper on it was when we got engaged with Iraq.
You're right.
And they kind of had the big hullabaloo about like weapons of mass destruction. Mm-hmm. And kind of the jury was out on whether or not we were there for selfish interests or whether we were really fighting terrorism. Mm-hmm. And I think that sucked the wind out of the sails of a lot of patriotic Americans. And honestly, we talked about,
it's very short-sighted in my opinion. But I understand that point of view.
Yeah.
But the entire region was full of terrorists.
Also, we live in a world now. Post-truth podcast. We're also now a post 9/11 world, and so consider that what we knew was post 9/11 generated warfare from 2000 end of 2001, all the way until we left Afghanistan. Theoretically, we're still engaged over there against ISIS.
Well,
Syria
like the whole Ukraine thing. Whether you believe it's
very specifically tied to what we labeled officially as the global war on terror. Ukraine does not factor.
Doesn't count.
So that GWAT theoretically ended right at some point, but it was a 20+ year war. Now, when
Afghanistan?
you stop, Iraq and Afghanistan combined, the global war on terror was over 20 years, and so
from 01 to 21.
That was the largest. That was the longest span of continuous warfare that our country had seen, at least within recent memory. Mm-hmm. So you stop and think, like, all of a sudden now everyone thinks of a war as stretching decades. Yeah. That's not how it used to be. Mm-hmm. Vietnam was a long, drawn-out conflict, but it wasn't that long.
It's like 5 years.
So a little longer. Yeah. But so you asked the guys who were in the Hanoi Hilton. It was a long.
And then Korea, was another.
So we had these isolated Cold War engagements, but they were confined, right? And so at some point or another, whether we won or lost, we stopped.
Yeah.
Whereas the global war on terror was almost lingering to a point where we were like, will we ever stop?
That's because they didn't see any end. It's like, what's the end of
I always thought we were going to get bin Laden and be done. And I was in Afghanistan when they bagged him. And so,
is that right?
Yep, I was at Bagram. And so they launched the mission out of Bagram, which was really crazy. And we found out back we were the DFAC watching CNN and being like, that's us. We're right there.
You didn't know that they were.
No idea that was happening.
Nobody knew.
And it was a big moment. And then we thought, oh, well, maybe we can go home now.
Yeah.
The joke is on us, right? Nothing changed.
Yeah.
So my theory that was going to be the breaking point and that we were just going to go home was wrong, right? At that point, there was so much at stake. Or so much invested there, or so many people were profiting. I'm not sure.
There's a lot.
Yeah. So, and we stayed around for a while longer. So,
the interesting thing too, especially with the Afghanistan thing, is that had been going on since like the 70s and 80s Cold War, where do you the psychological effects of serving, and does it ever bother you that knowing that like we were over there training some of those people that we then went back to fight? Well, and then knowing that you're now going and fighting this war,
I wonder if there are guys who did train that way. Like they trained people that ended up becoming our enemies,
Mhm.
right? How they would feel about that. I think to some degree, every military person out there compartmentalizes. If it's not immoral when they give you an order, right? We have this idea of law of armed conflict. And if they're not giving you a illegal or immoral order, then by following the orders that you're given, you are supporting your country,
Mhm.
right? And it might be something as simple as, hey, go fly this cargo over here, bring this person there. They're not immoral actions. And even you can extend that to say, hey, we trained this guy over here on how to create a sewage treatment plant in Kabul, for example. But then later on, he used the engineering experience that he got from us to learn how to build bombs. Like, well, would I feel bad about that? But I didn't do that kind of training, right? I never even trained an Afghani pilot. That simply wasn't one of the people that I ever trained. But I'll tell you, there's an interesting thing here. We train people from different countries in Africa right now in my guard unit. And you will find that a lot of those African pilots are Muslim. Okay. I'm not saying that they're terrorists or anything like that.
Yeah, no, that's
But
the dominant religion in
government
Africa.
may be responsible for a great deal of oppression on Christian populations in those countries.
Mhm.
And that's a good question of saying, like, how do I feel about the fact that I'm training this guy? Well, here's how I feel about it.
You're training foreign
Yeah, we train a lot of foreign pilots.
government or foreign military pilots?
Yes, we do. Yeah, FMS, foreign military sales.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
Well, you got to think. I mean, the C-130s proliferated all over the world at this point, and the only people who don't fly it are China and Russia.
Yeah.
So,
and you're at the hub of training
and
for the world.
for the old airplane, for the H models.
Yeah.
And so a lot of those guys who can't afford to have their own training schoolhouses in their country, because maybe they only have 4 or 5 airplanes, right?
Mhm.
They send their people here, and we train them.
You know what's wild about that? Just connecting the dots to 9/11. All of those hijacker pilots came here and did, pilot training in the United States at various places, not at military installations, but
flight sim.
just the irony there that they were trained by.
Well, and
US
we talked about this
nationals.
earlier. Like the United States produces a very high quality pilot, and it is still a business. I mean,
Mhm.
in theory, you can train anyone to do a job, and they can take it and do something terrible with it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that that's necessarily like, there probably are some areas where you're like, if you're training someone to do nuclear, fission, and they go out and use the technology to create a nuclear bomb and kill millions of people, I don't think you're going to sleep great at night. Right.
Sure.
I think that's probably the case. And so there's probably a little
We
bit
saw
of
that in Oppenheimer, I think.
I didn't see it. Was it good?
That's a good. You should
I need
watch
to
it.
see it.
Yeah,
Cillian
there
Murphy's
was
on
a
my
spy
favorite.
there the whole time. Which
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
The Russians were involved, for sure.
Yeah, well,
It was a
basically,
big race.
a guy who was a spy for the Soviets ends up, leaving the program and then going and showing them all that he's learned.
Classic.
So,
Yeah. And so, great question, and the answer is, in a lot of respects, I feel like my goal is to create safe pilots. Right. When I'm training a pilot, I want to create a safe pilot, because overwhelmingly, the chances are this guy is simply going to be a military pilot that moves people and equipment around his country. And the last thing I would feel way worse if I didn't do a good job training the guy and he screwed up and killed himself in an airplane.
Yeah.
That I would really hate.
And
right?
you're training in sims and in actual flight as well.
We do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy. My dad still teaches in the simulators.
No kidding.
And so I had him several times in formal training courses with the Air Force. He's still there. He still teaches in the sims. And a lot of times what will happen is after they're done with the simulator phase of their training, I'll get his students and get to fly with them in the airplanes.
So you guys are kind of running the program.
Oh, we're not in charge. But
the O'Connell flight program.
But it is definitely a family business. It's really cool.
So what does your week look like? I mean, it sounds pretty busy. You're training pilots and then you're going and flying commercial.
So now that I'm back full time at Southwest, I kind of bid my schedule around trying to be home for Sundays. I really like to prioritize worship with my family.
Yeah.
And then every other Wednesday we have like a family group at our house. I really want to be there for that, right?
Sure.
So I build my schedule in my airline around those big rocks. And so typically, let's just say I'm going to do a Monday through Thursday or a Monday through Wednesday on the road with the company. I commute to Dallas because we live where we want to live. So
Dallas being the hub, Love Field.
My
still,
hub,
right?
yeah. And we've got 11 or 12 domiciles like that, but mine
Yeah.
is Dallas. So it takes me about a half day on each end, or at least a
So you
total
drive
half
to
day.
Dallas, or do
I'll
you
drive.
catch a jump?
Sometimes I'll fly at LIT and catch just one of our company planes and fly in the jump seat. So kind of depends on what the schedule's like. I ended up getting a Tesla so that I could make the drive to Dallas cheaper.
And you're a tech nerd. So
also because I'm a giant geek. So
does it make the trip all the way, or do you have to charge it?
I supercharge for like 20 minutes total on
bad.
the way down. It's not bad, but and it does the self-driving thing. It's pretty.
And
pretty
when
sweet.
you're at home, your solar panels charge it for you, right?
They are.
Yeah,
which is cool. We're finally up and running on that, which is I'm geeking out over it. I'm always checking the app, like how many kilowatts are we producing? And it's like it's cloudy outside. I'm like, oh, that's not very many.
Not as many. So, I mean, I would talk about geeking out. I want to geek out on commercial piloting. I mean,
so I'll say this: we talk to guys that are in military, noble profession. You can still do part-time military service, but one of the things that really is interesting about flying in the airline world is I had guys that were going that way and they would come back and I'd see them and I'd be like, how is it, guys? And they'd be like, Tim, sometimes the grass really is just greener on the other side. And I'm like, really? It can't be that good. It can't be all good. And they're like, man, it's a pretty good job. It is a great job. It is awesome. I like, my personality is a good fit for Southwest.
Yeah.
Tend to hire a lot of goofy dudes and really, really competent pilots who love flying. And we interact with people, so a lot of what we do
is the friendly skies.
Well, theoretically, I mean, and you're going to have horror stories from any company, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I make it my mission to try to always, talk to the kids and just give people a positive experience, because flying's not fun for the average American anymore.
That's true.
Since 9/11,
changed it.
Yeah, I mean, you're jumping through hoops, and
I'd rather be safe than sorry, I guess.
Right, and it's always this conversation about, okay, if you want freedom, total freedom, you give up safety or security. And if you want total security, you give up freedom.
Well, the TSA did not exist.
Exactly.
Which is insane to even think
of.
Oh,
it's bonkers to think of the difference.
You can just walk on a plane.
Yeah. And there are ways you can fly like that. Mm-hmm. They have smaller carriers out there that work out of the fixed base operators where you can just walk onto an airplane.
More executive type
yeah,
jets
exactly. And some of that is becoming a little bit more accessible to the flying public. Yeah. So, which is a really cool thing.
Yeah, you got
probably not good for my paycheck,
Uber
but
for flying or whatever.
Yeah, they really do.
Pay $2,000 for a seat or whatever.
And it probably is more expensive, but man, I mean, if you're in a position in life where you can afford it.
I did do that once. Nice. I was on a job, somebody else paid for it, but it was a pretty cool experience. Yeah. And you just kind of walked on, and they take you where you need to go.
I mean, totally awesome. So now in my world, by the time the passengers get to my airplane, they've practically done calisthenics to try to get through security and get to the gate and all this stuff. And they're flying with kids. It's a tough thing to be moving around the country with your family in 2024.
Well, plus the aisles have narrowed and the leg room has gotten small. I just feel like every time I get on a plane, it's like less room than I had the last time. I mean, I don't.
The conspiracy theorists out there claim that there's less leg room and stuff now.
Although Southwest, I will say, has the most.
I don't know if we do or not.
It seems to me
we don't have first class.
Right.
You go on there and you can fist fight someone for a seat.
Try to get the bulkhead, or you try to get the aisle.
Yeah, and everyone has their own favorite, right? So, I have like my favorites when I'm commuting, But so I'll teach you the secret tricks of what the most. There's no right answer, right?
Right.
So, but yeah, so the fun isn't really there in flying as a passenger as much as it used to be when you and I were kids. If you ever got a chance, I didn't fly much commercially. Yeah. We drove everywhere around the country in the family.
No, that is true.
Right.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden it became pseudo accessible. And there were a couple of times where we flew, and I remember thinking this is the coolest thing in the world. But as a kid,
it's funny you bring that up, because the first time I ever flew commercially, you were there. It was a group trip.
We went on like a mission trip.
We were going to Seattle or somewhere. I had never flown. I think I was 13 or 14. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you were just so excited because you had flown before and you knew how much fun it was.
I think it's awesome.
I just remember you were just like you are now, like Kid Kenny.
Oh, dude, that's the craziest thing is I remember what it was like to be a kid and be like, the airport was cool.
Yeah.
Of course,
it's still cool to me. I still like it. I mean,
and then you might get a chance to meet the pilots or just kind of peek in the flight deck and see what it's like, and you just everything that's happening around you is just like, I don't know why.
Isn't that wild? You kind of already had that itch, and now here you are flying.
Yeah. I never imagined as a kid that I'd be an airline pilot. That was wild. I mean, I even had die-cast metal, airlines.
Yeah.
The little
Hot Wheels of planes. Yeah. Whatever. Yeah. Those.
And my dad would ring him back when you go on TDY, and he was coming back to the airport or something. And he would pick up something from the airport store. Now I know where he got those things, right? Because they still sell them.
Yeah.
But so it's wild to think like how far we came, and then all of a sudden now that I'm doing this job, I will tell you it's a phenomenal job, and I get to fly with awesome people. Not 100%, but most of the time I'm in the right seat at first officer, right? So the guy in the left seat, the captain, these are guys that had full careers, military or on the airline side, and they're phenomenal pilots. Yeah. And they all are top 5% income earners in the United States.
It's amazing to think of just how much air travel there is constantly happening.
Oh, it's
not
crazy.
only in the United States, but globally. It's insane.
4,500 flights a day from Southwest alone.
Wow.
I don't know if we're back up to that, but at one point that's what we were doing. So
and those are all 737s?
All 737s because that's all we fly. Yeah. And so, but now you got to think that's just Southwest. So you added Delta, American, United, all their subsidiaries.
It's really incredible that the safety records of all the airlines are just through the roof.
Considering how much is actually happening out there. Like, for instance, I just saw a news article, an American Airlines plane. It was a subcontracted carrier, slid off the runway in Rochester, New York. Okay. 53 people were evacuated. As far as I understand, there weren't even any injuries, which is great.
Yeah.
But that was notable because that was the only major safety event that happened that day, maybe that week.
Yeah.
And so
the only ones you hear about is when the guy lands a plane in the river, right?
Or the Boeing airplane that had the door fall off.
Yeah, right.
Oh, come on, Boeing! Like we got to get this right, Hey, by the way, I had that happen to me in a C-130.
No kidding.
Yeah, I was in Iraq on my first deployment. The same one that I got decked in the head with a checklist. Not the same day, but
it's a rough day.
No joke. Our crew entrance door fell off the airplane in flight.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a weird deal. So, but anyways, so apparently it happens. Now it happened for ours because the airplane was built in 1960, and then the little latches had corroded, and
Yeah.
So I don't think Boeing has that.
Humidity will do that.
Who knows that?
All those Vietnam flights.
Oh, you're talking about Vietnam. Yeah. Who knows what's going on? So in the C-130 world, we're like, oh, well, yeah, that's just
so how do you
just happens. But in the civilian world, that kind of thing does not happen. Right. Like if you have an engine failure in a commercial jet, it's extremely rare. As a matter of fact, this is crazy. There are a lot of guys who will go their entire career in an airline and may only even have to go around a few times. There are some guys that have been working 10 years in the airlines that have never even had to go around.
Just clockwork. It's just
they just, it always works well.
Wow.
To have to reject on the runway or to have to, deal with an actual no-kidding systems in-flight emergency is remarkably rare.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's like the toilet. Oh, the toilet's not working. Let's get everybody off. Switch planes.
Yeah, that can happen. And those kinds of things are not critical.
Right.
But to have, and so we have like, the Wi-Fi went out.
Or the air conditioning's not working. The plane's 200
Now, if pressurization isn't working, it's a whole other matter.
I can't watch the movie I want to watch.
No, most people would consider that a crisis.
Yeah,
but
that's
for
a crisis.
The reality is that the airplanes are extremely safe. And, they had the thing with the Boeing 737 MAX. It was down, the FAA grounded for a couple of years. They put it through all the ringers and tests and everything like that. That airplane is now officially the safest airplane ever built.
Which one?
The 737 MAX.
Yeah. But by Boeing?
And they put it through so many tests and such stringent, fielding operating tests that no one else had that kind of scrutiny on the airplanes.
Yeah.
So
I remember when that happened. What was the reason they grounded in the first place?
They had a couple of foreign carriers that they crashed. They had a trim issue, and they weren't trained well on how to use this trim system, and they crashed into it.
I see.
So, and they were not American carriers.
Operator error.
Boeing had a piece of the pie there.
Yeah,
Boeing had some culpability.
I see.
Because of the training and the way that they released the aircraft. But the real thing that's amazing is that the United States aviation culture probably prevented that from ever becoming even elevated as a threat, because our guys are trained at a level that they're supposed to be able to react intelligently when someone goes wrong.
Yeah, well, so many of them come from military background.
But even on the civilian side, they understand how to they're going to maintain aircraft control, they're going to analyze the situation, and they're going to take appropriate action. That's what you do.
So tell us about that transition from this high-tech, C-130 that you helped develop, heads-up technology, into when you transition to commercial. Like, how did that work? What kind of training did you go through?
So they do 8-week training at Southwest, and that's probably one of the longer training courses in the airlines. A lot of them are actually a little bit less than that. And for me, it was a leap, because I had only flown prop planes. Now, they were turboprops, but you got to think, an actual jet engine, turbofan, any of these turbine engines out there that are not propellers, they function differently. The aircraft flies differently.
Yeah.
And really the biggest difference
A
was,
little smoother.
a lot
quieter,
smoother,
yeah.
and also really hard to slow down. The little
Yeah.
things that you wouldn't think would be a problem, but they're really slick. They don't slow down really
Yeah.
quickly. So, which if you're ever flying around and you hear this like rumbling and I feel the airplane shaking and stuff like that,
Yeah.
it's probably because they're using their speed brakes. We don't even
Ah.
have speed brakes in the C-130. We don't need them. We just
Yeah.
hold the flight. Then you got these giant props that just stop you,
Yeah.
in the air. Can't do that in a jet. So that was a learning curve. It was kind of fun. And nothing about that was like safety critical. I just had to learn how to fly a different kind of airplane. But the operation is different. In the military, you get out to you come to the squadron in a, like say today, or let's say next Thursday, I'm going to fly in the afternoon. I'm probably going to take off around 2:00. So I'm going to come in around 10:00. All right, 10 a.m. And I'm going to log onto the computer and make sure I'm signed off on all my read files and signed in to my flight. And then I'm going to sit down. I'm going to brief the student for a couple hours. And then we're going to go out to the airplane. It's going to take us an hour to get everything pre-flighted. And then we're going to eventually get the engines going. We're going to take off. We're going to fly for 2.5 hours. Then we're going to come back. We're going to go to parking, go to debrief for maintenance. And then we're going to go into the building and we're going to debrief for about an hour.
So you got an 8-hour day there. Basically.
Easily, right? Yeah. So, and that's fine. That's what I'm getting paid for. I'm
Yeah.
totally cool with that. But it is a long day, and it's for 2.5 hours of flying. And so, in the airlines, I show up to the plane 30 minutes before we're supposed to push. I do all the work as a first officer.
I've noticed that just as a passenger.
Sure.
The pilots kind of, they'll pass you on
because if they stretch it out, then you have less day that you can use the pilot.
Yeah.
Because there's Part 117 limitations for how long you can fly.
What is that?
Period.
8, 10, 12 hours? Or
Yeah, there's waivers and stuff like
I
that.
got
So
you.
I don't know what it.
It's always fun when you're on the plane and you're about to take off, and wait, we got to change the cruise.
I probably should know the number, but the reality is they track us really closely. The other day I
Yeah.
was flying, and it didn't feel like a long day, and I'm getting phone calls and messages going, "Hey, you're coming up on your duty day," and I was like, "Dang, all right,
Already?
Thanks for looking, guys." I mean,
Is that the max you can get in a year's time?
there's that too. So there's a number of hours you can fly in a day, duty period for a day. You have to have a certain amount of rest between flying days. And then there's a certain number of hours, block hours, you're allowed to fly in, say, a 6-day period or a 30-day period. So, and they track all those things really carefully.
Yeah.
Because the companies are all super scared of the FAA.
Heavily,
So,
it's all heavily scrutinized.
yeah.
So you show up 30 minutes before.
30 minutes before the flight, and I go in, I do all the stuff to, load the flight plan, set up all the systems and stuff like that. And then I go and do the walk around and make sure that the exterior of the aircraft is all good, that we don't see any like screws hanging out or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? And then I come in and the captain will be there. We'll brief it up. We'll talk about our taxi route and our departures. And, like, hey, if we do have an engine problem, this is what our plan's going to be, things like that. So we always are ready for those kinds of things. And then you wait for the passengers to finish boarding and you push back. Typically Southwest my experiences were unless something weird is going on, we're usually earlier on time. And so we're pushing back. And then, but the pacing, from the moment you start pushing back, it's so fast compared to that pace that I described from the military, where I'm spending most of my day sitting talking at a table, and I just happen to fly for a couple hours. But when you think about the airline pacing, you showed up to the airport, you got to the airplane, you got things running. As soon as the passengers are on, you are making radio calls, making PA announcements, pushing back, starting engines, taxiing out, taking off, using your departure procedure, climbing, cruising, chat to the captain about how much money he makes, and then you hit your top of descent, and now you're on an arrival, then an approach, and then landing, and then taxi, and then you're at the gate. And it is fast pace. Yeah. And so, now, granted, Southwest flies a lot more short flights. We're not doing we do transcontinental flights, but just not as many. Yeah. And so, but I might do 4 or 5 of those flights in one day at Southwest, which is remarkably similar to my deployed environment for the C-130, but it's not at all similar to the way we do training in the C-130. And so
that doesn't have a lot of connections, right? So you've got Dallas, Atlanta, and all those. I feel like you get there in an hour.
So we fly. I don't even know the list is like 150 different cities at Southwest now, and any given trip, like one trip in my board is going to say, it might be overnighting in Raleigh, Durham, and then Orlando, and then LAX, and then Sacramento, and then Salt Lake City. Dude, I fly all over the system, and that's one of the cool things that I like about it is I don't have in my company, we don't have like prescribed routes per se.
I see. So it changes for you.
Yeah,
You
it's
don't-
super dynamic. Yeah.
Wherever
No, I
you're
might
fly
know.
in, you might fly to the next place, rather than going back and forth.
Absolutely.
But
we
you're on the same plane the whole day.
No, sometimes we
Sometimes you
switch
switch planes.
Yeah, it's kind of
Okay.
weird. That's an inefficiency that I don't love. But who knows why? Maybe that one plane is
That-
scheduled maintenance or something.
Or the
so.
pilots need to be somewhere to get another one or something.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
really complicated. We have 11,000 pilots in our company,
Wow.
and we're smaller than Delta, American, United. So, they're moving people around as well as they're moving airplanes around. So it's really complicated. I don't really even get into too much, and I just like go where they tell me.
Yeah.
But it is dynamic, and I like that a lot. It's also fun because it keeps you on your toes, and then you get to see new cities. And I'm a big cigar guy.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I love
good company here.
finding.
Yeah.
I love finding a cigar lounge in cities. I found like the coolest cigar lounge in Syracuse, New York, of all places.
Wow. Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. And then you'd just be amazed, like different places we go. I love, if I have the chance on an overnight, getting the chance to like see the city. Like I was in St. Louis. I mean, St. Louis is close. That most of us have been there.
Sure.
But I was downtown, right across from the ballpark,
Mm-hmm.
and within easy walking distance of the Arch. And I was just able to like walk around.
That's
I got a
great.
haircut from this cool Russian immigrant, and then found a cigar lounge,
Yeah.
and like it was just a
You're a
neat
constant
experience.
traveler,
Yeah.
basically. That's
And
part of
so
it.
if you're going to be doing a job where you have to travel, it's nice that you are able to appreciate the places that you're going.
Yeah.
I will say this: I try to make the most of it. This is my chosen profession. However, when I started at Southwest, I had a very different worldview. I was just chasing money.
Mm-hmm.
At that point in my life, that was what I was doing, and the money was there.
Yeah.
And so, but you could talk to my wife MP, and she will tell you she felt like a single mom. I would go on a trip, and I would take all the extra flying I could get, and I'd get home, and I would just be looking forward to leaving again.
I see.
That's
You'd
not
be
the right
gone
way
like
to do
4 or
it.
5 days at a time.
And that's not right. It's not the duration gone as much as
Yeah.
it was the fact when I was home, I wasn't present.
I see.
And so I had a big change of heart in summer of 2021. And I realized, hey, I'm missing the opportunity to be an influence with my kids.
Yeah.
I'm missing this critical relationship with my wife. And I was just chasing dollars.
Yeah.
And you'll find, I think if I had continued down that path, MP even said, she's like, hey, we may only have been a couple of months away from getting divorced.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Well,
for a
you've
second.
got to
It's
have that
super humbling.
work-life balance.
Yeah.
That's
And-
something a lot of people miss.
It happened a lot in COVID.
today.
I mean, I think COVID really reset a lot of people's clocks, whether it's
Yeah.
like, hey, is it money, or do I want to be doing what I love? Do I want to be home
Yeah.
with my family?
And
Mhm.
it's such an important thing when we talk about the airline career. It's a phenomenally fascinating job, but that also comes with kind of a high income, and then at the same time, an immense amount of temptation to pursue the dollar.
Sure.
You'll find
Just keep going
materialism
up
is
that.
just rampant there, and so.
And do you anticipate
also-
doing this through the rest of your life?
So yeah,
Yes.
max age for pilots right now in the airline world is 65. They won't let you
Gotcha.
continue past that. So I sort of feel like we may be positioned to retire at age 60, but we'll see.
Mhm.
I could still do it, like part time, essentially on the books.
Are you
until it's
considered
right.
part-time now? Are you
Where?
at Southwest?
No.
Okay.
No,
So
I'm
you're
full-
full-time
yeah,
there,
full-time.
2-3 days.
And there really is no such thing as a part time
yeah.
pilot.
Because you're gone.
Well, it's
Out,
not
you
that
know,
you
several
can drop your
days.
entire schedule, but you're just a pilot.
Yeah.
And there are guys in the company that fly, 100 hours a month, and there are guys that fly 10.
Yeah.
Or less.
Right, so you kind of can make your own schedule.
You can. And Southwest has some really great scheduling rules that allow us to do that. And so for me and my family, I'm constantly adjusting that balance now. And I try. I'm not the guru here. Like, I'm learning as we go, but I'm trying to listen to my wife and my kids and get a feel for,
It's probably best policy,
yeah.
I think.
But now there is a number that we need to hit so that we can meet our financial
Yeah.
obligations. And then
Yeah.
if we go past that, then maybe we're meeting some additional things, like we're saving more, we're paying off some debt, or maybe we're like MP and I just started talking about last night. Hey, it's time to start traveling a little bit. We want the girls to see the Grand Canyon or get a chance to see New York or something like that.
Right.
And so, no, but at the same time, I was like, hey, well, we need a budget for that. So it may be that's an extra day of flying at Southwest so
Mhm.
that we can have a budget for us to go do something that's important to us as a family.
Yeah.
But that'll be a back and forth.
Is
That'll
your
be a
family
constant.
allowed to fly on a plane that
They
you're
are. Yeah.
flying? Okay.
Yeah, so,
I have
um,
weird questions like that.
No, that's great. These are, and that's actually one of the cool things. Like, a lot of people don't know. I didn't know when I got hired at Southwest that my
Yeah.
parents were going to get to non-rev for free.
That's cool.
My mom was so
How
excited.
about friends? Can friends non-rev?
I can give you buddy passes.
That'd be good.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
almost a blessing and a curse.
Why
Because
is
you get the
that?
buddy pass, but you're the lowest priority. So if
You
the
get
plane
on
fills
the-
up,
Yeah.
you're a standby guy, and it's like, sorry, buddy
Yeah.
passes are almost like
I did that on Delta one time.
they're not that great.
A friend of mine's wife was a flight attendant for Delta for a long time, and
Cool.
this is I don't know 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
He calls me. He lived in Nashville at the time.
Yep.
He calls me. He's like, "Hey Johnny, you want to go to Tokyo on Friday?" I was like, artist.
This was
self-employed
out
at the time.
of California, right?
No, I live back. I can't remember actually. I think I live back here.
Okay.
I can't remember. It might have been L.A. I don't remember, but I was like, yeah, sure.
Dude, that's cool.
So we got her passes or something,
Yeah.
and we were able to upgrade. So we got first class round trip on Delta for like the price of gas.
Unbelievable.
It was awesome.
Oh, that's so cool.
But he would do
Yeah.
stuff like that
Yeah.
a lot
That's really fun.
because she got all this perks of the job.
There are travel benefits, and we don't use them
Yeah.
as much as we should. Let's be honest. So
Yeah.
I think over the years we'll probably take more advantage of that. I mean, it's a special thing, and
I was in LA. I just remembered.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in LA. at
How
the
cool
time.
is that? I've never been.
So
I
he
mean,
met me at LAX, and then we flew.
I've been to Japan once on a C-130,
Yeah,
but I've never been to Tokyo. Like,
you should go.
oh, I
I've
know.
been-
I really want to go.
I've
Like,
been a couple-
that's on my bucket list.
That's one of my favorites. For
That's
sure.
so cool.
Yeah.
And so we'll have opportunities to take the girls and go, especially around the country. It's easy
Yeah.
for us to travel on our own airline. But
Mhm.
we're trying to line it up here at some point where I'm going to be flying a leg and the girls are on the plane. So I'm the pilot and they're riding along as passengers.
Yeah. You've
You
gotta do
cannot
that.
do that in the military.
Well, I want to
right?
ride
So-
on one of your flights. I
Yeah,
gotta
sure,
figure
like,
that
let's
out.
go. Our schedules are so like set a month in advance typically, and
Gotcha.
so you can maneuver them. But so a lot of times I know what my schedules are going to be like.
Yeah.
The problem is I'm based out of Dallas, so I'm almost never starting my trip out of Little Rock.
Yeah.
And so all the guys that are around here are like, hey, man, I want to fly with you. It's like, well, I hope you're starting in Dallas because
Yeah.
that's probably where I'm starting.
Get
You
to
know, so,
Dallas.
and even from then I might leave Dallas, go to California, and bounce around the Midwest and the East Coast. It's like so. It's a little challenging to line it up to where like you're flying with your family.
Yeah.
But it can be done. So
Let's do a flash round of weird commercial air travel questions.
okay, hit
I'll
it.
start
Yeah,
it.
do it.
Do you have a favorite airport
Oh man.
and why?
Okay, great question.
Maybe
I
you've got
definitely
two.
have some least favorites. So
Maybe
favorite
there's-
airport.
Maybe there's one that's for the passenger experience and one that's for the pilots, right?
I would say, the actual airport itself, LaGuardia.
Okay.
It's super cool. If you go
Yeah,
in there,
it is cool.
just airport wise, if you go into LaGuardia, there's this center area where a lot of the food court is. They have this water fountain thing, and they release the water in patterns, and then they have projected lights on there. If you haven't ever seen this, you've got to Google it.
Yeah.
It's wacky. They do a Christmas thing, so every 10 minutes or so, it does like a show almost with music and everything. But the water's coming down, and you're like seeing stars falling and stuff like
Mhm.
that. It's so cool.
It was cool.
So I would say LaGuardia was like I was like a kid.
you're
standing
drawn
there,
to that technology.
I mean, I had my phone out doing like time lapse videos.
Yeah.
So
So
it does have a direct to LaGuardia flight now, so we can just go there
That's
just
true.
to see the waterfall.
yeah.
That's
Brown.
awesome.
It's a quick trip.
it's not on Southwest because I know we don't have that flight. I wish we did. I wish we had a lot more at Little Rock.
Yeah. What you got?
This got some lead up. I mean, obviously, a lot of men are adrenaline junkies for like muscle cars.
Yes.
And if you're one level more intense, you're a motorcycle driver, right? What is it like flying a plane like that? Is it an adrenaline rush? Does it fade? What
It
does
is.
it feel like?
So when I started flying military, the trainer I started with was a T6, and it's a single engine turboprop airplane. And before that, I had only flown Cessna type little Cessna trainers, and I'd only had like 20 hours in those, so not a lot. The first time you take the power control lever and you push it forward and release the brakes in that thing, it's unlike anything you ever experience in a car. The closest thing you get to it now is like you go find a friend who has a Model S and they hammer it down and do like an EV launch.
Yeah.
But back then that wasn't a thing. This was unbelievable. You're like Fast and Furious kind of. You're expecting the wheels to come off the ground. I mean, it's intense. And then you do it in the C-130, and you've got 4 of those engines, and it's like wow. The jets are fast as well, right? I mean, but they're just not built to be fast off the block, right?
Mhm.
We don't need them to have afterburners like a
Takes
fighter.
a little time to get them up to
And here's the
speed
thing:
there.
that's just my experience. I'm not a fighter guy.
Mhm.
If you talk to a guy who flew F-18s or F-16s, F-22s, something like that, I can't even imagine. Those guys routinely pull like 7 or 8 Gs.
It's like a rocket launch when they take off.
Oh yeah, it's insane. It's got to be crazy, right? I've never even ridden on one, and so I'm not like I can't say that
you haven't ridden on one.
Like a fighter?
Why not? Don't you have the access to do that?
No.
Yeah. They can't throw you in the jump seat.
They probably could as a passenger for like another squadron or something.
Yeah.
When I was active duty, maybe if I had like, I don't even know when would you do it? Like, you know, you have your job, you have your airplane. Yeah, I don't know. So I know some cadets that got incentive rides when they were at the academy, and they would go to a fighter unit. The unit would put them in the back seat, and they get to go to it. And some of those guys were like, "That was the coolest thing in the world." I never wanted to do it. That was
because you can maneuver.
No, they go upside down. So now the T6 was fully aerobatic, so you could do loops and stuff, and we would do loops in formation and that kind of stuff. It was I was super uncomfortable with that stuff. I knew my kind of flying was going to be mostly wings level. You know, like I'm very happy with my C-130. No, we do low level stuff. So our version of like adrenaline junkie in the C-130 is we fly, 210, 230 knots. 300 feet above the ground and just down river valleys and mountain valleys and stuff like that. And it's a lot of fun. Like that is a different kind of, but now the fighter guys are doing, they're doing all this cool maneuvering and trying to shoot each other and stuff like that. Well, I don't do that stuff. I just fly low to the ground really fast. So
is the C-130 ever going to go upside down?
Can't go upside down. You'll see them pretty routinely use 60 degrees angle of bank, which is if you're ever on the airplane when they do that, it is a different experience. Like you're going to be like, oh, wow, okay, a big airplane just did something pretty aggressive.
Yeah.
And you'll never, in a commercial airline, you'll never see them go over 30 degrees angle of bank. So ever. They simply won't do it. They won't do it.
Yeah.
That would be an absolute not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
So really keep it nice and smooth and steady.
You'd have a bunch of shorts that need to be changed.
And you'd probably be getting in trouble, getting a call from the chief pilot. Yeah, you don't want to do that. So yeah. So great question. So we have a little Cessna. It's a buddy of mine, and he keeps it in our hangar. And so,
well, yeah, you live at like sort of a country club if the golf course was an airstrip.
Yeah,
kind of, right?
That's a good way to look at it. We call it an air park.
Bunch of houses, residential around
everyone's got a couple
Such
acres
a cool
there.
concept. I'd never seen that before until I came out to your house.
It's a really special little setup. There's not a lot of them around.
Yeah.
And so ours happens to have a paved runway, which makes it even better because after it rains, you can still land and take off, right?
So cool. So you got like a dozen neighbors and everybody's got a hangar with a plane?
Yeah. Well, for the most part. And so we have a couple T hangars there, some guys that fly that don't actually live on the air park. And there's not that many neighbors. Everyone's kind of just got a few acres. And so, but it's really cool. We have the little Cessna in the hangar, and it's a buddy of mine. It's his plane. So he gets to hangar it there, and I get to fly for gas, basically. And so,
it's cool.
But what's really neat about it is that I love taking people, doesn't matter if they're adults or kids, but especially kids, and put a parent in the front seat with me and 2 kids in the back seat and just go fly around. Because a lot of times kids have never left the ground. Especially Arkansas.
Sure.
I think about it. I mean, like, there's a lot of kids who've never
I've
flown
never
anything.
been in a plane of that size.
It can be expensive. And but also it's just maybe not accessible, like.
Would you do that if he asked us to go?
I was gonna
Or
ask,
would you
can
freak
you take
out?
us for a flight?
Absolutely. I love doing it.
Okay, I would love to do
Yeah,
that.
I'm not kidding. I bet you we've flown 200 people in that airplane.
Wow.
It's a really cool thing. And you're asking about like the adrenaline junkie thing. It's a little Cessna 172. It's not going to blow you away or anything like that. But you're flying.
Yeah.
I'll
do it. It just kind of freaks me out a little bit.
It's going to feel different than an airline.
It's cool, man. And it's like, oh, I can see my house from here. Like
there's something about a plane that small. Like I love roller coasters.
This will definitely itch the roller coaster
like
itch.
Thrill rides. I don't mind flying.
This is the ultimate thrill ride. That's kind of what I was getting at. Yeah.
So what's it, like a 4-seater?
Yeah, 4-seater. So 2 in the front, 2 in the back. Nothing really fancy about it.
I guess.
You guys got to come out, dude. Absolutely. And then of course afterwards we've got to smoke some cigars.
Right.
So
can't smoke in the plane. Is that?
It's not my plane.
Yeah.
So we're taking really careful care of it.
Well, you used to be able to smoke on airlines, right?
Oh yeah, Southwest used to have those club seating in the back.
Yeah.
So where you had some people who were looking at each other.
That's
club
so
seating,
cool.
And they would. That's where all the cigarette smokers. My mom told me this. I didn't know. She's like, yeah, I used to go straight to the back of the airplane because that's where all the fun people were.
Yeah.
So
it's like the lounge on it. Yeah.
Which you got a question?
No, go ahead.
Which is the commercial or military? Which one scratches that adrenaline itch? Like which one kind of trumps the other?
Great question. I have done the military thing long enough now that I'm over it.
Mm-hmm.
I check the boxes enough that I do not ever need to scratch the itch again. All right. So some people still, I mean, they've been doing it for 20 years and they still love it and they still just want to, that's all they want to do, and more power to them. Right. For me, it's a good job and I'm thankful for it. But I am not seeking it out as needing to get my adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
The airline business is not an adrenaline rush. So if I was needing to get my thrills, the tactical airlift is the way to go, right? I mean, because you're doing cool stuff.
Yeah.
From every training sortie, you may be doing assault landings, airdrops, low-level flying, formation flying in the weather. Actually, that's just terrifying. So yeah, you have lots more dynamic, engaging things you do in the military. No doubt about it. The airlines are supposed to not be that way, right? They're supposed to be very easy, comfortable, predictable. And so I love that. And where I am in life right now, the thing that I love about my job at Southwest is that it's more about the conversations that I get to have with the captains. It's about the people that I get to hopefully, brighten their day a little bit. Making funny announcements and stuff, making people laugh and smile, and getting to experience some cool cities and locations. And then hopefully getting to spend more time with my family. Yeah. Right. Now, if you want to just have the adrenaline, you go fly a little airplane.
Yeah.
The Cessna is by far more terrifying than anything else I do.
Right. From just the mechanical hot rod standpoint of like which plane feels
the C-130 is going to be the thing that comparing the two of them, the C-130, because you're max power and then popping those brakes, just you're doing your max effort takeoffs. Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean you're way outside the operating envelope of a commercial airplane in that airplane. So by far more engaging. I still love that job. It's just I no longer crave that like when I was
combat zones.
Certainly, I'm good on deployments, and I really respect the fact that the next generation is already out there doing that. I'm thankful, because if they weren't, presumably I would still be doing it. Yeah. And so I'm really thankful that they're there. Yeah.
That's great. I have one question I think it might lead us down a path here. Okay. Talking about UAPs, right? You've got all this talk in the news right now, pilots seeing stuff all the time.
Oh, dude, I've got some crazy pictures.
What used to be UFOs.
Yeah.
We want to see the pictures. Do we want to take a break and start a new segment?
Take a quick break. Okay. It sounds like we're turning a corner.
We're going to turn a corner. Next segment is the UAP segment. So come back for that.
Awesome.
All right.
Alrighty, and we're back. So before we went to break, we talked about UAPs, which obviously is a very relevant thing.
No, I don't know the lingo. I've seen crazy stuff, but I don't know the lingo.
Well, that's the new UFO term. Right?
Oh, okay. Well, I was in the old-fashioned days.
It's more broadly encompassing.
Okay, so it stands for
unidentified aerial phenomena. Because there's so many different things that obviously sightings have rapidly increased.
Yeah,
I think as technology has become more capable, and just in general, I don't know. Maybe there's more events than there used to be, but we've got a lot happening, and of course, a lot of the people, probably familiar with the news and the New York Times article from a few years ago. And
well, it definitely involves the Air Force because you're the other people up in the sky.
Yeah,
you would think that I would know what was going on.
Yeah. Well, we just want to get into it with you as far as pilots see stuff all the time.
This conversation is happening all the time in my life now, so it's really fascinating. And I've had some captains that are like sold.
Yeah,
that there is something weird going on, extraterrestrial, maybe.
Sure.
Like I mean, these guys have master's degrees. Yeah. Like they're solid.
Well, it's become a topic.
Convinced
that we can talk about.
The first best footage of it was
Commander Fravor, right?
Navy guy, right?
He was a Witten Navy guy off the coast, of California, Pacific Ocean, huge event. That's what the New York Times article really was about a few years ago.
Yeah,
and then the Tic Tac video came from his experience, which is all, high-tech camera sensors and things like that. And they're getting these weird, experiences captured. And so I think Fravor and other military personnel have now testified before Congress.
You have David Grush, who's spoken to
Grush,
small branches of the military.
Yeah, 15-year veteran. You have more veterans coming forward now in, hearings and public hearings. It's made this topic, I think, more acceptable to discuss. So, what are you hearing? You said you're hearing a lot more about it now from military.
Well, just people out there in the system right now are seeing stuff. And so I think it is important to remember, like, you can see something and it can be unexplained, but then you will always have people who take the next leap, and it's not a logical leap. And they say, well, because I can't explain it, it must be XYZ.
Sure.
That's the dangerous part. because you get people animated about this, and they're convinced that it's aliens. They're 100% convinced that it's aliens. But the problem is the burden of proof there falls on the person. You can't claim that just because you can't explain it, that it's automatically going to be one thing and not another.
Sure.
So that being said, I have seen personally, I've seen a couple of just the, like the incongruent bright lights that just disappear kind of stuff.
In daylight or nighttime?
Nighttime. It's always at nighttime.
Gotcha.
It seems like I haven't seen any of the videos or pictures that came out of daytime flying.
What is before you talk about the lights? What is the light signature of, let's say, a military or commercial vehicle? So you can look at it and be like, hey, I see those lights.
Should be the same,
right?
You should have like a red strobe, white strobe. It's possible that if they leave their wing lights on or something like that, you'll see a steady light. So that's why, like, lights are just going to go with aviation, right? It has to be something that stands out as like, well, that's not a normal lighting configuration for an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
And
we're talking about 20 years of flight experience here.
Yeah,
so
and
even
what
then, something
but
is.
But the thing is, all I've ever seen could be easily explained by saying that was an aircraft with a different lighting configuration.
Sure.
So for me to say that I've seen something weird is just saying I've who knows why they set up the lights that way on an airplane. Or a rocket, for example, or something like that.
Sure.
I don't even know what a lighting configuration.
You personally
of a rocket
haven't had
is,
the experience daytime flying a craft that you've never seen flies.
No, we nearly hit a UAV, and I couldn't tell you
a drone.
A drone, a big one.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you what model it was, but I'm 100% sure it was a drone, quadcopter type thing, and it was a big one. And it was in California going to Sacramento.
Interesting.
But that's not unidentified.
Yeah.
Even though I can't tell you make
Is
and
it
model.
recognizable? Like when you first saw it, were you like, okay,
well, it went by so fast.
Yeah.
And within a couple hundred feet of the aircraft, and we called it in.
Damn, that's close.
So, but they didn't. It wasn't on TCAS. That was the thing that really alarmed us. We should have seen it.
What is TCAS?
It's the traffic collision avoidance system that every aircraft operating in certain altitudes is required to have. And so that means someone was illegally operating a drone.
I see.
So were you in a commercial?
Yeah, I was in 737 on that one. And the captain and I were like, "Holy smokes!" Because you hear about drones out there, but we were pretty high up,
like a big drone.
We're a big drone,
high altitude,
really high altitude, and it was
what size would you say, like relative to a car?
It had to have been bigger than your little table right there. So it was a big drone.
I was thinking when you said it, you were thinking like room size.
Could be a car. As big as a car?
No. Well, I don't know. If they make them, I haven't seen those. That's cool G.I. Joe stuff, but I haven't seen any drones like that.
Well, it's weird something to be that high altitude. That's obviously military or something.
Who knows?
Black Ops.
Yeah, and again,
Silicon
it's
Valley. So
you really don't know what kind of prototyping they're doing out there. It could be something for Amazon.
Yeah,
and that's why it's like I don't make that leap to say that I can explain what it was.
Yeah,
and part of the reason is because I'm pretty creative, and I'm on the bottom end of creative when it comes to humanity.
What?
Meaning that people are out there inventing stuff all the time.
Well, there's way more stuff in the skies now than there ever has been.
Oh, and there's also more low and normal orbit launch vehicles than ever before. And that's really where I think that a lot of this conversation probably should be steered, is to say, like, look, in the history of humanity, we really recently just started flying airplanes. But even really recently, we just started launching an immense amount of stuff into space.
Going into space,
And it's like, I don't know what those launch vehicles look like all the time.
Sure.
They should be advertised, but it is conceivable.
There's too many private parties
out
there.
Other stuff going up there.
Rich folks with doing whatever.
There's also hypersonic testing, and I don't know what that visually looks like.
Yeah.
Well, I show some of these pictures, though.
I would love to, and we're gonna throw them up so everybody can see them. But so you haven't personally had the experience, but you know others that have. That talk to you about things they've seen.
Yes,
right?
and
usually military pilots too talk about it. So, I mean, do you in the commercial realm? Do you come across commercial pilots who say, "I have seen this"?
These pictures and videos and stuff came from commercial pilots.
Commercial pilots. Wow.
And so, like, wait,
how many you got there?
I have one series of pictures, and then I have one video.
All right,
so
let's see them. Is this all from one event, or is this
I think. Well, the video is different, isolated.
Okay.
So you know how it goes. Friend of a friend kind of thing. Hey, look, you sent these pictures out.
Well, you're much closer to the skies than we are.
The best evidence we have out there is probably out on somebody's iPhone. I mean, some pilot's like, bro, let me show you.
So tell us what we're looking at here.
I don't know what you're looking at here.
Okay. Well, tell us how it came into your custody and all that.
A friend from my class.
Okay.
Yeah. You can swipe left.
So
and
this
right
was
there.
from him flying.
He's probably
commercial?
flying 37,000 feet. If I remember correctly, they said they were going over the Midwest when they saw this one. So, they've seen something similar to this in a lot of different operating environments in the United States, which is why I think if you're going to speculate about what it is, you would think, low Earth orbit launch.
Almost looks like a rocket or something.
It does.
But
it's that comet effect that you see there.
Is this the same? These two different incidents? Or
the video is the same.
The picture.
The video is a different incident. And if you watch to the end, it does something kind of where it almost looks like it creates an atmospheric condition. It just looks like
this is pretty low altitude as well.
I'm pretty sure that these were all in the 30,000s.
Okay,
they were taken. I cannot confirm because
what's the city beneath? Do you know where the location is?
And I remember them saying I think the video was taken somewhere over the West Coast. So
that's for somewhere.
I don't actually know, so don't hold me to that.
Like, what's the scale
and that's the other thing. It's like you find these anecdotal things, and it's like a buddy, like, oh, look, a friend sent me this. It is conceivable that some dude cooked this up in his basement and just started sending it out. So it's like I don't have any proof.
It looks certainly real. It looks authentic to me.
I had a captain. The video came from a captain.
Now it's doing weird stuff.
That's where it gets strange.
Huh.
He was convinced that this was aliens.
well, we call it phenomena. Oh, wow. What is that?
It looks like a portal's
opening. It sure does.
Weird. And I think depending on depending on your frame of reference from the pictures that you saw, I think that could be the same vehicle. Because it
looks like whatever it, and we'll get into my thoughts about it because I also have what I believe is a UFO experience that I'll share.
I mean, this, what we're looking at is part of the reason why they've changed the terminology here.
Yeah.
The UAP is broader. There's so many different theories on what these things are, whether it's military technology or black ops tech or private party contract stuff going into space or spiritual explanations, otherworldly technology, dimensional. That's phenomenon kind of encompasses everything.
Yeah.
And that's
runaway civilization.
Yeah, they live in the core of the earth.
Okay.
Runaway civilization. Well, that or like, let's say 100, 200 years ago, you had people like Nikola Tesla, some of the smartest scientists who made huge breakthroughs, or people funded by like Thomas Edison, or finding these discoveries and the interest groups. I mean, everybody who was paying for scientific experiment at the time was these rich groups. And so there's theories that we had access to a lot of early technology very early, like way early than we know and experienced in the public. And so the idea is that maybe groups of these elite people took this early technology, started creating zones of the world where they live with this advanced technology and have been for 100 years or more.
It's a theory.
So kind of a Wakanda thing where you don't know they're there.
Right. And it would only be kind of a...
That's a good example.
Yeah.
There's so many different explanations. I mean, that's why to me it's important to talk to secondhand witnesses.
Yeah.
I mean, this is from a credible commercial.
Well, I don't know if it's credible, and that's the thing. It's like,
but the guy you got it from is right.
The video came from a captain.
Yeah,
he claims
Southwest
that
captain.
He took the video. Dude, there's no way of knowing if he did. I no way of knowing. And so, but he was passionate. I mean, we were flying at night, and he spent most of his time looking out there. Yeah. Like he really thought he saw something.
So when you fly with this guy, he's always looking out the
windows. Well, I almost never fly the same people.
I see.
11,000 pilots. Chances are pretty good. You may not even ever see the guy.
But when you did fly with him, he was scanning the whole skies the whole time.
Yeah. He was interested in it. He wanted to know what do you think about this? Like, I told him, it's kind of the same thing I'll tell you guys. Like, the natural world we live in is full of wonder. I have not even scratched the surface of seeing some of God's creation here that is full of wonder. I don't have to go looking any further than what I already have in front of me to be impressed.
Yeah.
I'm not saying
that's almost proof that there is something out there, right? It's like we don't even know what's in the ocean. I mean, it's
you don't know because you're a finite being, and this is a huge world and an even bigger universe, right? And it's like I believe wholeheartedly in God. I believe that God created the heavens and the earth.
Sure.
And so, but that doesn't take away from my sense of wonder. If anything, it grows it.
Yeah.
I mean,
the universe is vast.
Oh
and
my
isn't
gosh! And
necessarily-
and
Well,
even
in
if
fact,
you just
the
get
Bible, I would say, confirms the idea that you might be seeing some things in the sky that can't
Yeah.
be explained. I mean,
well, there's
a
all
lot
these
of
ancient texts, the
prophets
Bible
that
included,
describe-
right? There's
Right.
all sorts of events in them.
chariots
And,
of fire, and Ezekiel has an experience.
Yeah.
When God came to the temple on his throne with the wheels within wheels. So it's like I definitely feel like there's a precedent if you are a faith-based person that
Yeah.
the idea of UFOs shouldn't be out of hand. It's almost like, well, is it sci-fi or is it like
yeah.
is it this thing that maybe
Spiritual
it is
phenomena.
spiritual phenomena
Yeah.
that
And
we're seeing activity?
I kind of see that and think, well, I love gadgets and technology.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely enthralled with engineering and like for instance, I know that right now there's a huge amount of R&D being pushed towards hypersonic. There was some pretty big breakthroughs in fusion where they actually produced more than they put in, right? Which is a big deal.
There's a lot of advanced private contractor things
There's some
happening.
big stuff happening in
Yeah.
technology.
The big question people have in relation to that topic is, are these leaps in technology man-made, or are these leaps in technology being reverse engineered, right? From crafts that have been captured.
Oh,
And so a
yeah,
lot of
The
the
thing with
witnesses,
the supercomputer chip is that
yeah, a lot of the testimonies out there now are pointing a lot towards this reverse engineering idea. But I'm more curious, with your pilot background,
Yeah.
how many times instances have pilots talked to you or told you, I saw something, I don't know what it was?
It's
Is
happened
that
with
common?
three captains out of all the guys I've flown with.
Gotcha.
And so out of 100 captains or something like that,
Yeah.
only 3 of them, but they were all recently
Interesting.
in the last couple months. And so,
Okay.
do you think that's like the reverse memory fallacy, or do you think it's that they're finally ready to talk about it? Because
neither.
it's,
I don't think it's about. I think these things are really happening now.
Yeah.
That they weren't happening before, and that they
Now they
are.
are.
They're seeing stuff now. And we've classmates out there who have said, "Yeah, I didn't catch a picture of it, but I saw something weird as we were going over the Midwest, and it looked like this."
Huh.
So you're seeing a lot of the repeated stuff, like
Yeah.
the same picture or video that I showed you
Yeah.
is exactly what people are describing.
That aura type, or
and it kind of looks like a
sort of-
comet effect or
Yeah.
something like that, and it
so it's
looks like
becoming
an
consistency of something identifiable.
yeah. Well, I don't know if it's identifiable, but as much as they can say, "Hey, we can relate this experience to the one that someone else
This
had."
person
Yeah.
saw it. I've seen the
Right, but
same
the
kind of
variations
thing.
in like UFO reporting is like this guy says this ship had tentacles and whatever, and it's like
we're-
so it's like for a long time with UFO stuff, because it was that niche and it was cool and anti whatever. Because we went to that, what was that group that we went to the meeting?
That was a MUFON meeting, which is
Right.
the oldest, research group in the United
like
States.
SETI kind of stuff. Or,
Yeah, the Mutual UFO Network. It started in the '60s, and it's a group that essentially,
forensics on UFO stuff.
yeah, they
right?
research sightings and they go to what they think may be credible. They go talk to the people and see what find out.
Look
They
for bad
investigate.
footage,
They
manufactured
investigate.
footage, and
Yeah, they find out what's real and what's not. And really, they only publish the stuff that they don't. They're sort of like, we don't know.
Yeah.
A lot of times they'll find out like, okay, this craft was in this proximity at this time. We're pretty sure it was this, but they publish monthly their findings on sightings that they find credible that are unexplainable. And so it's it's certainly a topic that's become more current. And I think, like you said, these are things people are seeing now.
Yeah.
More.
I definitely think that you can say, objectively, you can say there's been more people claiming that they're citing stuff.
Mhm.
And so like the number of claims has gone up
Yeah.
for sure. Like I said, personally, I've seen some pretty traditional kind of, lighting configurations that don't match anything that I've seen
Yeah.
for Visrecki in the Air
which
Force.
could be a
or
Lockheed project you don't know about or
or
whatever.
just, yeah, who
Yeah.
knows, right?
Yeah.
And so hard to say on those. These things right here, I've never seen it, but I mean, it's like, okay, a lot of people are corroborating that
Yeah.
they've seen the stuff.
Yeah.
We just don't know what it is.
Well, a
And
lot
so,
of it now, I think, is it's more of an open forum for pilots to come forward. Used to, you'd be a pariah, if you came forward and reported.
You're probably right.
And that's not only occurred in the military, but also in commercial aviation. Like pilots would not comment because then they'd be seen as a nut.
I will
Well,
point
no.
out,
Yeah.
I flew all over the world
Mm-hmm.
for over a decade and a half, and I never saw anything weird
Mm-hmm.
anywhere else. So, and now
It's
that's just,
interesting.
take it for what it is.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of these claims are coming out of Russia.
Well, you're one pilot of 11,000.
right. Yeah.
So,
But
supposedly,
my point is
yeah.
that my point of course is that, and overwhelmingly, if you ask around like our guard unit or something like that, we don't have anybody who's like, yeah, I saw weird stuff in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't happening there.
Yeah.
I didn't see anything weird in the Middle East. I didn't see anything weird in Africa. I didn't see anything weird as we flew around Asia, coming over the Aleutians, in Alaska, nothing, right? So now that's anecdotal, but then all of a sudden you have United States and you're like, most of the stuff that people are seeing that's weird is happening here.
And there's 3 in a row within a few months.
And you're like, okay, so we can at least start to narrow in and say like, okay, geographically, whatever's going on seems to be here. Right?
South America also is like starting to
which like it doesn't surprise me if there's
definitely Western Hemisphere.
Hemispheric could be, and you never know. Like private entities, but the other thing I tell people too is like, because the captains always want to know, like, well, I think they want to challenge you a little bit to be like they have this belief, their worldview is now being informed by the fact that they think that there's aliens out there flying spaceships around, and because something can't be explained, that's a rational explanation to them, and they want to argue about it. This is what they want to talk about. And this is way more fun to talk about than their boat.
I think that's great, because I used to talk about this 20 years ago, and I was one of the weird kids.
Right. Yeah.
So it's great to have this actual conversation out in the open and people talking about it, and there's a lot of commercial airline incidents that you would probably love to read about from the past. There's, some really iconic ones. One that I can think of is Japan Airlines in the 80s. A pretty awesome event. Multiple pilots recorded it. They were basically sort of followed by a mothership type craft that it's sort of a notorious incident in this commercial, reporting, commercial airline reporting. But I think it's going to become something that's more common.
It could be,
as now that pilots know that it's a topic they can report on, not only military pilots, but also commercial pilots.
You also get the risk of confirmation bias.
Yeah.
Which is that you saw something that was actually totally normal. They maybe just looked slightly different to you. And all of a sudden, because you were predisposed to think that you were going to find something like that, in your mind, you the way you recall the experience is way different than what really happened. And so you'll see false positives essentially like that as well. When I talk to captains about it, I kind of say that, like, look, I'm the guy who believes in an unseen God. The evidence of the God that I worship is creation.
Right.
And I believe in the Bible and a biblical worldview. But I cannot prove to you definitively in any form of rational conversation that Jesus Christ, who walked the earth 2,000 years ago, was the Son of God, died on the cross for my sins, and rose again.
Right.
I can't. So I'm the guy who believes that. Who am I to tell you that something else that doesn't have an explanation is implicitly false? Right. Like look, I have faith in what is unseen.
There's a faith jump there.
And so do you.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that your faith in seeing an alien aircraft is existentially going to be something that saves your soul, but I can't it wouldn't be right for me. It'd be kind of hypocritical of me to come out and say, "Oh no, just because you can't explain it with science, it can't be right." Well, it's like, hold on. I mean, that would undermine my entire theological,
worldview.
mindset.
Yeah, that's definitely a hitch for a lot of people. Just religion, science in general. But like what you're saying is definitely true of like the idea of God. You can't have it in a scientific context, right? Because you can't do the empirical method on God, right, to find out God.
According to my theology, he pre-exists that kind of scientific method.
Right, and that's kind of the whole Schroeder thing, whereas our mind is so in it that to get to the truth you're talking about, you have to get out of it, right? And so there's really no way to step back with the scientific instrument and be like, yeah, I've proved in this.
When you guys have a podcast here called the Post-Truth Podcast, right?
That's right, yeah.
And so
you like the name?
I do, and I think
it's the best one we can come up with.
I like it because, at the end of the day, we all know that now we have, and I think it's true. A post-truth world is absolutely where we live now.
What we're talking about.
Yeah, it's very difficult
on that phone, right?
to know what's authentic. I mean, it's hard for news reporters, for example, for us to know what is real news and what's been blown out of proportion or underreported or whatever. Yeah. So, and so there's a lot of that kind of post-truth, but also even philosophically now, you'll find that in our country, more and more and more people don't have a black and white picture of what is right and wrong or what is truthful.
Sure.
And so
there's no absolute truth.
It's a gray world now.
Many people will claim that they don't have absolute truth. But upon closer inspection, most of them still have some sense of absolute morality. If you were to say, "Hey, I shot your wife,"
Yeah.
you would feel like that was wrong, right? And so when pinned down, most people still have a sense that there is right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But now, what do you base your sense of right and wrong on? Right? That's the real catch.
Moral truths, right?
And that's in the post-truth world, you'll find more and more and more people don't have something definitively that they base their sense of morality on,
It's a very ambiguous
their
world. Yeah,
and it can be really challenging. It's often really challenging to raise your kids in an environment where there's
right.
where absolute truth is contested.
Mm.
But in the vast history of humanity, this is kind of a new development.
Mm.
Most people throughout humanity were not atheists. There are very few in history.
I think technology is the driving force here that's pushing us all into this.
Technology and science is kind of that double-edged sword to some degree.
Well, like spiritual journey is definitely, it's singular, but then we do it also together. So it's like spirituality calls for conviction, and conviction means acting in the moment, right? But we get to a point now, it's like when our morality is democratic, it says, oh, you can't act until we kind of all agree.
Yeah.
Right. And so those are, I feel like that's every man's conflict is like, I have my own journey of I have to go do this and act upon principle or upon conviction. And then there's everybody else watching you like, well, we didn't ask you to do that. And it's like, well, I can't, I have to go do that.
Well, it's that word. Do you want to live in the self-determination world or the Ayn Rand world? Right. It's like where someone outside force conforms you to a mold. And so that's the struggle I think a lot of us are having right now. It's really, you got to find that. And, I think it's become, like you're saying, it's a mainstream issue.
Oh, it's a huge difference. You think the philosophy of the day is secular humanism. There's no doubt about that. In my mind, that seems to be the predominant philosophy that most people hold to. Even your evangelical Christians have mostly moved towards secular humanism to some degree. They believe in a works-based theology. It just is a works-based theology that includes Christ.
What does that mean, works-based theology?
Rather than, Ephesians 2:8, you've been saved by grace through faith, and this is not your own doing.
Right.
It's a gift of God, not a result of works, so that no man can boast. That is the counter to what most people would say is, oh, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to live a good enough life, and I'm going to pursue
I'm going to follow
Christ.
Moral code and ethical code.
I'm going to obey God's law or moral code, however you want to say it.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to earn my way to justification, or in another vernacular, I'm going to earn my way into heaven.
Sure.
So most people have taken, even in the evangelical circles in the United States, have begun to be swayed by the culture at large, which is a secular humanism. Secular humanism is telling us that you can do anything you set your mind to. You are capable of essentially being your own God. You can.
Well, as we move into technology and Neuralink, and you want to live forever and stuff like that.
The other thing, you can. Yeah, you absolutely can earn your way.
You could be a God.
Yeah,
and it's not only you're going to get to live
science and technology. That's kind of like you said. With science, we can live forever. With technology, we can be inside.
Where is this all going?
Automation or some type of metaverse where. If I put this in my eyes and we see each other however we want to be seen, right?
It's,
so it's
the Ready Player One, which was one of my favorite books. So
that's pretty good. Yeah,
I love the book, and so it's totally secular humanism. By the way,
a lot of sci-fi philosophy is, but it explores philosophical ideas.
When you get into morality, though, secular humanism parlays almost immediately into this idea of what's okay for you is okay for you. What's okay for me is okay for me. Right? Moral relativism. And so when you really start to get post-truth world, you find now we don't even have an absolute morality. And what is interesting about that is that you really can't function without some form of morality. You have to base it on something, but it's becoming more and more popular to claim that we have none, that there's no absolute form of morality. It's a challenge thing. You guys are going to unravel this in your podcast.
Maybe.
It doesn't mean you're going to solve it. But you'll be able to discuss it, engage.
And we have these issues on the ground while there's stuff in the skies we don't even know what it is.
And definitely, as I've even just told people the name of our podcast, let's say to someone who's a Christian, right? They're the truth is the Bible, right?
And that's how
even Christians view how that truth means to their own lives and differently. But then the difficult thing is the Bible doesn't tell you that if you stand in cold water for 30 minutes, you're going to get hypothermia, right? So like there's a lot of truth about our lives that we have to live and operate, right? That is not contained in the Bible, right? There's things, obviously, consumer laws taught us that, hey, there's a lot of things about products and you shouldn't eat this or that we just had to figure out by eating.
And a lot of people dying along the way.
Yeah. So the world we live in is very complicated. I think you can turn to religious scripture to orient yourself, to bring yourself to moral code, to have spiritual experiences. But then there's a world full of information and obstacles that you don't have any prior understanding of. And especially with all the stuff we're talking about, propaganda, or just people being so relativistic that there is no common thread. How do we not create truth, but obviously
how do you define
you anchor
truth?
yourself on your absolute truths, but you have to go walk a journey. And so how do we actually find and discover truth in the world we're walking in, while also I feel like maintaining the moral position that we've set ourselves to?
And there is and like you kind of identified, there's a significant difference between spiritual truth, meaning that something was defined, like in my case, my biblical worldview, will say that all scripture is useful for teaching and training and rebuking and correcting. It doesn't mean that all scripture is there for the purpose of telling you how to manage your finances. There may be some scripture that talks about money, for example, but it does not mean that it is going to be the purpose of the scripture. You always go to the intent of the writer to see, okay, what was the purpose of this, book of Jonah, for example, right? Jonah's purpose might be to tell us about being obedient to God, not running from him, for example.
Sure.
But at the same time, when we don't obey God, does that mean we're automatically going to get eaten by a whale? No, we all know that intrinsically is not the point. It does reveal a lot about God's nature, but it is, scripture as a whole is the only place where I think I can find anything that tells me about God's nature is revealed. But it doesn't mean that it's going to tell me everything I need to know about how to fly an airplane.
Or how much iPad time your kids should get.
Oh, yeah. Or if they should get any at all.
Right.
Yeah. So 100% right.
And it's also, when you look at different religious points of view, right, this different texts are applied to lives differently. So the Buddhists may look at a situation differently than you might, based on their...
I suspect they do. Yeah.
Based on their code, right? Based on their text, and the Hindus and the Muslims and so on. So it's, when you have a world that has so many different divergent ideas and also congruent ideas, I think you have to, that's the conflict between what you're talking about, which is we all live by our own code, but then also which moral code and spiritual code is best for me, right? Based on my culture or place in the world, or,
if it's all handed to you on a silver platter, where's the discovery?
Right.
The seeking.
The context is so important, I think. And that's the issue. Part of the issue on a religious level is when the whole earth isn't on the same page with the idea of God and the definitions of God and
very
where
different.
God came from. And, that's probably where the earliest divergence happened culturally.
I suspect you're absolutely right. At the point that people began to have different gods, which happened early on.
Yeah, pretty early.
If you follow just biblical.
Well, there's plenty of gods
history.
that died by now. Like, I don't think we're not in the Norse god book anymore.
So,
right?
well, I guess not.
Maybe somebody is.
I'm not well versed on
it's becoming
those.
popular to be
right to be a druid.
So you'll find, I think your assertion that, hey, at the point that people began to worship different gods, we became extremely divergent as people groups. And it's still the case now.
Yeah, it is.
You'll find.
Well, now in addition to that, you can do the no God thing.
Which I think is kind of
humanism, right?
I was having a good conversation with a friend
you are your own God,
who's a remarkable theologian just yesterday, and he was kind of reading me up on this idea that atheism has overwhelmingly been a recent development. And so I think he's right, and I don't necessarily think that says anything.
I think it peaked, though. I feel like it peaked like 10 or 15 years ago.
I just flew with a captain the other day who was a strong atheist and wanted to call out. He had been a Christian.
I know a couple of atheists.
The whole time we were flying, he just wanted to poke at the Bible and say, like, well, what about this contradiction? What about this contradiction?
Yeah.
And what was interesting
you can poke holes in things, but I don't know. You keep going.
So the burden of proof is on the person who asserts. Yeah. It ought to be. And we ought to know this as a people group when we have a conversation right here. If I'm going to assert that there are aliens flying around, the burden of proof is now on me.
Yeah.
Right. So likewise, if you're going to assert that there is no God, or if you're going to assert that Scripture is contradictory or something like that,
Yeah.
the burden of proof falls on the person who asserts.
Well, atheism is faith-based as well.
I
Prove,
absolutely agree with that.
You can't prove that there is
you
no
believe.
God.
Well, in the end of it, nobody has the methods to test and prove themselves. So any question related to the origin of the universe or the existence of God versus not it's entirely beyond the realm of any person
it's all faith-based
to confirm, right?
It
so
is.
You have to believe.
I think
when you're believing that way, usually it's because you already have an outcome that you have in mind.
Yeah.
Right? So you need to get on with your life, or you want to do this or that. So you adopt a mindset, maybe over time, maybe suddenly, because of something traumatic. But you
can say, I don't know
feel better about yourself
what or who God is, but to
Right.
say there is not one, to me, is
it's an impossible claim.
a little bit arrogant and impossible.
Yeah, and I think for the vast, history of humanity, people have overwhelmingly accepted that there is a God. That just seems to be most people. If you look at it throughout cultures around the world, there is some form of God. Now, where you find probably your most exclusive divergence from the rest of the world is biblical Christianity.
Sure. Well, I would argue any religious base.
No, what I mean, where we
Judaism
diverge significantly in theology is biblical Christianity, and the reason I say that is because biblical Christianity is one of the only ones that is exclusive. The rest of them are not.
Depends on who you read, right?
Well, I just mean that
C.S. Lewis felt like it was inclusive. He was somewhat challenged on that.
It was an interesting, as far as a universalism sort of perspective goes.
And I think you have more Christians now that are universalists that think differently about end of life than maybe they did 20 years ago.
If that's the case, then they don't fall in the category that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's becoming more common, is that you have more universalist Christians who, especially
incorporate a little bit of Buddhism. That's New Age.
Or those that aren't going to challenge.
I agree. I do think you'll get a lot of Eastern thought process.
Yeah, or they're not going. It's not exclusive. In other words, they say what's good for me. I'm a Christian. That's what's good for me.
Again, back to more relativism.
You're a Buddhist. That's what's good for you. Yeah. I think. Well, the point of the conversation in my mind is that you need a solid moral code.
You do.
No matter what it is,
you have to choose something.
Yes, you have.
Every person, every human being in the world who has a sense of morality has to choose something. Yeah. Now, some people will use science. Some people will use practical philosophy to build up for themselves a worldview and a sense of morality. I choose to use Scripture.
Right.
And I exclusively use the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
I don't include any other text for that. But again, you'll find, and you'll go into another culture where the Bible is not, distributed at large, and their sense of morality may be based on their ethnicity and heritage, stories that have been passed down from
tribal knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think it is a solid claim to say everybody does have a sense of morality.
Yeah.
Even in a post-truth world, you can't get away from this idea that in your mind, some things are good and some things are bad.
Yeah. So, it's obvious unless you're a sociopath, right? I mean, what's good and bad? I mean, that's we all sort of have an idea of right and wrong, like you said. Shooting your friend's wife is
wrong.
That's bad.
I say that's wrong. I say it's definitively wrong.
Definitively.
Now we may have other people out there who say, well, based on my sense of morality, it's not.
Yeah. It's interesting, this conversation, because especially coming from a military man, that sort of conflict within yourself, I'm sure, has been difficult to resolve whenever you're in combat zones. One of the earliest challenges I had with sort of the idea of God and Christianity and things like that was war. And it was always this idea of, well, why are we all at war?
It's the problem of evil.
How do you justify killing? You look at the Crusades or whatever the case may be.
Or even more biblically, look at like Israel and their actions.
Sure, stuff that's going on right now.
I mean biblically. They're directed actions by God to, go into different places in Canaan. So things like that. I don't know. I will say this, like, as far as whether or not was it an internal conflict? Not at all. And I don't think that makes me a sociopath. I hope not. But I think what I'm trying to say is that
it was a holy war, though.
Yeah, and I don't know that mine was.
I'm just saying in general, that's the way the Muslims saw it, right?
Oh, yeah, you're right. In perspective-wise, they probably thought the infidels were invading or something like that, right? So, and I'm sure that a lot of people, like I said, we started this conversation before, like, A lot of people are convinced that we were just there to protect our own resources and agendas in the Middle East. And certainly that was absolutely a part of it. There's no doubt that geopolitics played in our decision to get involved in Iraq specifically. Right?
Well, and to cater to that, they had they definitely spun this is Satan and Islam's attack on Christianity, this military attack, right? So I think that definitely a lot of people, both here, maybe not soldiers, right? Because soldiers are the ones who are ready to go defend their people.
Yeah.
But a lot of folks think, at least where I mean, definitely the crowds I grew up in, missionary Baptist churches, that that war was definitely for Christianity. Was
oh,
for
really?
God, right? Yeah.
There was no sense of that in the military where I was. At all.
Yeah, it's almost transitioned to preventing Iran from shooting a nuclear bomb at someone.
Well, maybe now, but that wasn't even a thing when we started.
But W&Ds they brought up pretty early on.
Yeah, they did that, but even
the
then,
idea being that those that are evil or wrongdoers can't have the missiles because they'll shoot them, whereas we have them, but we're not going to shoot them at anyone. You see what I'm saying? It's this muddy world we live in. I think when it comes to war,
but there's no doubt about the fact that, when we now start talking about political science, now we're in my realm of interest, because it's like, okay, a nation state is always going to act in its own best interest.
Yeah.
A nation state is always going to say, I want the weapons and I don't want you to have them.
Yeah.
It shouldn't surprise anybody that the United States does not want Iran to have nuclear weapons.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And it also shouldn't surprise anybody that the United States maintains a formidable arsenal of intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear missiles that can be launched, from submarines.
Yeah.
So, like, okay, should it surprise anybody that a country is going to try to assert its authority? No. Now, the waters get a little bit muddier in my mind when we go from just protecting the home front to now we're going out to try to gain an advantage in the globe with resources or influence, right? Soft and hard power projection. Now, that's what happened after 9/11. We went from, they may have, and I suspect you're right. I suspect that they did at the public level try to capture any advantage they could get to catalyze the population to support.
It's called
their
PR.
agenda.
Yeah,
they spun it, right? And they used everything they could to spin it. Now, to some degree, some of that was probably innocent in that they were just mad.
Yeah.
People were angry and wanted to do something.
Well, it's like the whole Pearl Harbor thing, right? It's like we didn't attack them, they attacked us.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's not like we went over there and attacked them.
Well, even then on a nation state level, art of war type stuff, that's the best way to enter a war is to
try to gain an advantage.
Either provoke them until they attack or to
like Blitzkrieg sort of things. There's certainly a lot of ways you can do it. I think you're probably right, though. I think they probably piggybacked on the incident to try to garner public support for what was about to happen.
Financing from Congress.
Sure. Yeah. I suspect that was a lot of that, especially in a representative, country. And so who knows? But at the end of the day, does it bother me that I was involved in Iraq? It doesn't really, because I did study political science and I do understand that my country was acting in its best interests.
Yeah.
At least as it saw.
You were defending life, right?
We did what anybody
do
else.
I think
that's like
that
if you had someone come into your house trying to kill you.
Different. No,
them,
I think
right?
that's a distinction. Actually, no, I don't think my mentality for going and serving
because it was a
overseas,
defense. Move really.
Some people say that we may have averted or thwarted future terrorist actions by getting involved in the Middle East. That was
we no doubt did 100%.
Yeah, was it?
Homeland Security came out of that.
Well, so that's different. But our actual
that was all part of the
engagement in Iraq and Afghanistan, I don't necessarily think it is a foregone conclusion that they would have had another 9/11 if we hadn't been there. That's.
I would agree. It's not a foregone conclusion.
But it doesn't bother me either way. And the reason is because I understand at a fundamental level that my country, the one that I've signed up to serve, in their military, is taking actions in its own best interests. Does that make me a bad person? No, it makes me a soldier.
No,
it makes me a soldier.
Yeah, I'm less interested in the bad person question as opposed to the religious resolution in your own mind.
So I will say this: I was not a person of deep faith through my active duty career.
I see.
I mostly just went overseas, did my flying, and played computer games.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be honest, right? Go to the gym and just kind of hang out. I didn't really start taking my faith seriously until summer of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And so
I imagine it's pretty difficult to be active combat zone soldier, most of the ones I know had to close parts of themselves off in order to do that.
I will say the guys that I really look up to now are the guys that demonstrated a rock solid faith in all circumstances.
Through all of that. It's pretty
I really
impressive.
look up to that.
Yeah.
But that is rare.
Yeah,
Let's
it
be
is
really
rare.
honest.
Yeah.
Just as much as we're pulling from the culture at large in the military and the airlines, you don't have a lot of anymore. There's not nearly as many, practicing Bible believing Christians out there. I say practicing.
Yeah.
I do not just mean you identify ethnically as a Christian because your parents used to go to church. That's not what I mean.
The only soldier I know through that period that was a chaplain in the
There you
Army.
go.
So,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like historically, though, like, I mean, even the founding of our country, the founding fathers, even if they didn't have a great personal faith, they obviously demonstrated it out loud a lot. But I mean, to them, especially George Washington,
they had moral truths.
He made his kind of initial big thing was he made an appeal. He said we have to appeal to heaven here, like that. This we've been put down for too long. We're appealing to God, and even though we don't want to do this, we have to do this to defend ourselves and for the brighter future. So I mean, I do think that.
And then the issue they had was they owned people, right? I think like
people think
complicated.
That warfare has been devoid of that. People who believe in a spiritual faith, especially one of peace, should feel bad about getting involved in conflict. But I mean, especially from a biblical standpoint, the idea of being a warrior, the idea of doing what you have to do. I mean, even in the Old Testament, I mean, they were ordered to kill people. Now, I'm not saying that that's what anybody needs to do in the modern day.
It's the same thing with Jonah, right? Just because
we still have to be men.
it applied to them didn't necessarily mean that it applies directly to us. So you can always launch off in a dangerous direction when you take something and you take it out of context, right? But in today's world that we live in, the reality is that you hit the nail on the head. Even if you fall under a biblical worldview, you'll find great scriptural connection with the idea of being a warrior, right? You'll find great scriptural connection with the idea of being a servant. And in some respects, I was both.
Yeah. You were, absolutely.
I don't now by far, and I think it was really important to foot stomp this. I was not boots on the ground, pointing guns down range. I have a lot of respect for those guys who were put in those situations.
That's a different
A good friend of mine, when I was growing up, he was maybe 3 or 4 years younger than me. His name is Baker. He went off to be a Marine sniper and came back, and he suffers from immense amounts of PTSD.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
It was a challenging, life-defining, and not in a good way, experience.
Well, it alters the human mind, all of that.
And
I mean, that's...
I see. We know a lot of guys who are in those situations, and so
people like that. They probably deal with their own hell while they're living for that. I mean,
I think they were probably in their own hell while we were there, and then certainly after. I suspect
probably punishment enough. I would imagine.
Let's be honest. I consider that a great mercy that I wasn't in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also wasn't a fighter pilot. I didn't drop anything kinetic and kill people on the ground and stuff.
Well,
like that.
in any case, thank you for your service.
Happy to have done it.
I come from a military family, and a lot of the conversation is just to have it.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that. It's really more to ask the question than anything else.
Yeah.
So,
and I will say this, if I could go back and do it all over again, I don't think I would change my service. I would just change my worldview when I was going through it.
Yeah.
I wish that I had cultivated a relationship with Christ during those years and been consistent. You know what I mean? I was not a person of deep faith back then.
Did you have a moral code?
I think it was kind of like, I know loosely what the Bible says.
You were a secular
and I was like, a little bit of the homegrown. And mostly I was just kind of distracted. I mean, probably the reality is I just didn't put much thought towards it back then. To the detriment of my soul, I think. Yeah. Right? I think if I had been
soul's important,
more mature, I would have been paying more attention to those kinds of things back then.
Yeah.
But I wasn't, So part of that is probably youth. And that's not an excuse. That is just the reality. When we're young, we think to ourselves, I've got 60
my whole
years
life
left to worry about God.
Yeah.
Or worry about morality.
Sure.
Or really pin down what I believe.
Sow the wild oats and
and
go to church later.
Exactly. And so I don't know how much wild oat sowing I did. Not really any, I guess, unless you consider,
hard to do that in the desert, right?
Unless you consider like computer games and that kind of thing. And cigars, yeah. So it's incidentally, I did. That's where I started cigars. They used to send them for free to the troops.
You got to have them.
Did you ever go to like a cool hookah lounge while you were over there?
They had one in Afghanistan, in Kandahar. They had a hookah lounge, and then actually, incidentally, the only time I ever even saw a hookah before that was the day that door fell off our airplane. We obviously had to land, and it was at a place called Al Assad, and they used to have this pizza hookah place on the military base right there.
That's great. All right, we got to do cigars, hookah, the airplane ride.
I will abstain from the hookah, but I'm all about the
cigars and the airplane ride.
Yeah,
thanks for being here,
dude. It was a lot of fun.
Really great to talk.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. One thing I want to do before, just to steer us back and close this out.
Yeah, we're almost an hour in. That's why.
Yeah, I know.
You got a phone
so
call,
it definitely
right? Fine.
A lot of the stuff we talked about today, I definitely from what I see about our current problem is, back in the day, I think you had religion, which oriented people and kind of was their bedrock.
And unified them, yeah.
Right. And then we started to explore the idea of philosophy, right? This idea of you do believe, and I believe, you believe, but what is our philosophy of, what does that mean? What is the common threads? And what do we think about that, not just what it is, right? And then eventually I think we got to a spot where science was supposed to be the thing that could unify people of different faiths, right? Because the Arabs came up with mathematics. Like, science was starting to be able to unite people because there was truth you could find in the universe, right? As a Christian, you think, like Paul said, the evidence of God is in the creation. So if you go observe that, you begin to learn about your creator. That united people, but I think we're back to the point where science itself divides, right? And it's run through the mill of the same arguments that we can't agree on any other topic, right? And now we've dissolved our trust, almost like our ability to find truth through science, and we've dissolved our ability to find truth in religion. And so we're decaying into these philosophies that aren't even developed philosophies. And so that's why we want to have people like you in here. And that's why I'm really thankful that we had you here today, because the conversations that we have with, I mean, I consider you an expert. I don't know if you want to call yourself an expert.
I may be an expert on some aspects of aviation, but that's about it.
Right. Well, you're an expert in your experience and what you experienced. I mean, we're all experts in our own experience, but we love to talk to people who have these varying experiences so that, people can find threads from this conversation that help bring truth in their own life, hopefully. So I just want to say thank you for that, because I feel like we've touched on a lot of stuff, and I feel like you're very clear on your convictions, and again, thank you for your service, and thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you guys for having me. A lot of fun.
Is there anywhere like online that you can be found? Do you have like a blog, or, I mean, I don't know if you want people to follow your social medias, but anything you want to direct people to? Not
particularly. The guys in the local community around here know that I do a lot of pro bono work helping with resumes and applications for airlines. They can reach out to me on the global within the military. I have a small logbook company, caters to retiring airline pilots and military pilots. We do like career books and stuff like that. DFC logbooks. You can find us online. But I don't do a lot of social media. I kind of made the decision a while back to look, I download Facebook on Sunday afternoons so I can check up on like 4 people that I love and care about, and then post some pictures, and then I delete it again. Smart. So that's kind of how I roll. But yeah, and I don't even have like a Twitter or a TikTok or anything like that. So I'm even sure if those things are still relevant. I really appreciate you guys though. And I'm just now getting into a lot of podcasts as far as just listening, and I'm excited to see where you guys take this in the future.
I appreciate that. Awesome. And fly Southwest.
Yeah,
that's right. You'll be in safe hands.
That'll be my profit sharing check. I'll take it.
The friendly skies still, or was it?
I try to make it pretty friendly. Yeah. So
right on. All right. Thanks everybody.
Thanks, guys.